Never could I have imagined that our paths would cross again, leading me to uncover a shocking truth. My name is Ashley, and I'm 35 years old. For the past decade, I dedicated myself to being a full-time wife, supporting my husband Sam with unwavering dedication. Though we never had children, we always believed our love was more than sufficient. A fulfilling life didn't hinge solely on parenthood. But then, Sam changed. Looking back, maybe it was his true nature finally surfacing. You see, my parents divorced when I was young, and I was raised by my father. During my teens, he confided in me the reason for their split: different personalities. At the time, it seemed trivial to end a marriage over such differences. But as I grew older, I painfully realized how crucial compatibility is. This reality hit harder when my father tragically died in a car accident last year. My father, a craftsman at heart, ran a successful construction business until his last days. Even at 70, he was revered for his skills, especially in building churches without nails, a technique admired by his clients and community alike. He would always cook for me after work with his dexterous hands, nurturing me with love and care. He often said, "What's important is not what you get in return from others, but how much joy you can give to them." I strive to live by his words, devoting myself to Sam. However, after my father's sudden death, Sam's demeanor changed drastically, revealing a side of him I had never seen before. Our conversations increasingly revolved around my father's inheritance. "With your dad's money, we can build our dream home," Sam would say, eyes gleaming with a newfound ambition. Yet I had never intended to use that money for anything other than our retirement savings. My father had worked tirelessly to leave us a secure future, not for us to squander it on immediate desires. I saw the way Sam looked at the inheritance with an almost desperate hunger, and found myself downplaying its value. "We can't afford to buy a house with that," I lied, hoping to preserve what my father had intended. Sam's reaction was unexpected. He seemed devastated, as if his world was crumbling. It was then I realized how much money could alter a person. I began to doubt if Sam had stayed with me solely for my father's inheritance. However, about 6 months later, on a weekend while I was doing chores and Sam was watching TV, he spoke up with an unusual seriousness. "Oh, I have something to tell you," he said, and for the first time since he proposed, his tone was grave. A chill ran down my spine as I sat across from him, watching a tear roll down his cheek. "What is it?" I asked, my voice catching. "I realize I've made you feel like I'm only interested in your dad's money," Sam began. "We don't have children, so we should be enjoying our time together, but I haven't put in the effort. Thank you for always being there, even though I leave all the housework to you and we rarely go out on my days off." His words stirred a mix of emotions in me, joy at his acknowledgement and regret for ever doubting him. Tears of both joy and remorse streamed down my face as Sam gently hugged me, his eyes reflecting the same warmth that drew me to him in the beginning. In that moment, I felt deeply grateful that I had married him. From then on, Sam changed his ways. Despite his fatigue after work, he started helping me with chores regularly. On his days off, he even experimented with cooking dishes he had never tried before. He took my occasional strictness in stride, and each time he overcame a new challenge, my heart swelled with pride. We began living each day as if we were newlyweds again. But then, 6 months later, things took an unexpected turn when a letter arrived in our mailbox. "Here, this letter was in the mailbox today. It's for you, Sam," I said, handing him the envelope. Carefully opening it with a pair of scissors, Sam exclaimed, "Wow, it's been 20 years since I graduated from high school. I've been invited several times, but I never went." Inside was an invitation to a reunion from his high school friends. I knew Sam had been invited to these reunions numerous times since we married, but he always declined out of consideration for me, knowing I had no ties to his classmates. This time, however, I encouraged him earnestly. "You should definitely go this time. Don't worry about me. Go and enjoy yourself with your old friends," I insisted. After some hesitation, Sam finally agreed to attend the reunion, which was scheduled for a month later. He began preparing for it, a rare occasion for him since he seldom socialized outside our relationship. His wardrobe lacked stylish clothes, and his hairstyle was usually unkempt. He explained that he felt no pressure to dress up around me because he could be completely himself. I've never been particularly fashion savvy, believing that inner qualities matter more than appearances. However, with the reunion approaching, our outings together turned into regular visits to men's clothing stores. I realized Sam's sudden interest in fashion was spurred by the upcoming event. Since the invitation arrived, Sam started coming home late from work. Normally punctual, he would arrive by 7 p.m., but it became common for him to return past 9 p.m., citing overtime. I trusted his explanation, though I hadn't seen our financial statements recently. Sam managed them and felt uneasy about questioning him. 3 days before the reunion, with only 2 weeks left, Sam came home and asked me to sit with him in the living room. "Michelle, my sister," he began. "She just broke up with her boyfriend and has been staying with a friend. But the friend's husband is returning next month, and she'll have nowhere to stay. I need to help my sister out." I understood Sam's concern for his sister very well. I have a younger brother who currently works overseas, and even after my marriage, I often worry about him and keep in touch. He's reliable, much like our father was, but sometimes too trusting and easily taken advantage of. Protecting him feels like my duty. So when Sam asked for help with his sister, I empathized deeply. But since our wedding, I hadn't met or spoken to her. I hesitated to use my father's inheritance for someone I barely knew, so I kept quiet about it. "Didn't your father love helping people? Why won't you help my sister?" Sam pleaded, confirming my suspicions that he wanted to use the inheritance. He desperately urged me to allocate a portion to Michelle. However, I remained steadfast in my decision. "As I told you before, I have no plans to use my father's inheritance. I've decided to save it for when we might truly need it," I insisted firmly. Sam muttered something and retreated to his room, avoiding me since then. We shared meals together, but conversation dwindled to a minimum. No matter how cheerful my attempts at conversation, a cold atmosphere lingered between us. 2 days later, I was browsing cakes in a pastry shop, hoping to lift Sam's spirits. It was then that I felt a familiar gaze and turned around. "Dear, is it you, Ashley?" stood my ex-boyfriend from middle school. Despite 2 decades apart, we recognized each other immediately, which brought a burst of laughter from me. We had lost touch after high school, and I had no idea what he'd been doing. Meeting him here, back in our hometown, was unexpected. After buying our cakes, we decided to catch up at a nearby cafe. "Ashley, you haven't changed a bit," he remarked with a smile. "Neither have you. It's hard to believe it's been 20 years, I replied, feeling the exchange refreshing and out of the ordinary. We chatted and laughed for a while, reminiscing about old times. However, when the topic shifted to love stories, his expression suddenly darkened, leaving me unsure how to respond. "I recently broke up with my girlfriend, and all I do is regret it," he began. "Why did you break up?" I asked, curious to hear his side. "I couldn't provide her the emotional support she needed," he admitted. For a moment, I wondered if she was cheating, but what she said next resonated deeply with me. He went on to explain that his ex-girlfriend had a fragile constitution, unable to work long hours, and thus only held part-time jobs. Despite knowing this when they started dating, as he found success in the marketing industry, she struggled to keep pace. "I could provide a luxurious life," he told her, and reassured her that she shouldn't blame herself for not working as much. However, she never seemed to believe him, constantly in tears. Listening, I felt a pang of empathy for his ex-girlfriend. "You were just boasting about your achievements and putting pressure on her," I interjected. "She probably didn't want a lavish lifestyle. She likely felt lonely because you were too absorbed in your work." His busy schedule meant he only went home twice a week and didn't text her daily. Hearing this, I couldn't help but raise my voice. How did she tolerate that? If I were her, I would have ended things too. No matter how busy you are, neglect like that is unacceptable. You knew her limitations. Why didn't you care for her more? As the truth sunk in, I couldn't help but draw parallels to my own marriage, especially around our 3rd year together. I was struggling with infertility treatments and sank into a deep depression, both physically and mentally drained. Despite this, my husband, who claimed to be occupied with work, never once checked in to see if I was okay. After I finally expressed my pain, he apologized and made efforts to improve. The hurt from that time lingers painfully in my memory. Seeing how desperate I was, my ex-boyfriend seemed to realize his own mistakes. He confessed he wanted to reconcile with his ex but lacked the courage to act. Wanting to help him, I listened to his grievances about my husband, and we spent time together consoling each other. At least that's what I believed. However, a shocking revelation left me stunned. My ex revealed that his older brother's wife was extremely cold-hearted despite being a stay-at-home wife. She neglected household chores and wasted money on nights out, pushing him towards considering divorce. Shocked by this story, I sympathized deeply. "That's awful. I can't believe he's putting up with her," I commiserated. "Yeah, that's why he's secretly planning to let loose at an upcoming reunion," my ex explained. The word reunion struck a chord. Comparing details about his brother's situation and my own husband's behavior, a shocking truth emerged. His recent ex-girlfriend was none other than my husband's sister, Michelle. We were both left speechless by this bizarre coincidence. Sharing everything about our troubled marriages, my ex became visibly upset on my behalf. "Your husband is lying. He's using his sister to gain access to your father's wealth," he concluded angrily. We decided to confront my husband the following day. Knowing his usual work hours, we tracked his movements. He left his office 10 minutes later than usual and headed towards an unfamiliar mountain lodge. There, we witnessed him being warmly greeted by a woman, clear evidence of his infidelity. Realizing how hard it would be to gather solid proof ourselves, we opted to hire a private investigator. Upon our return to the lodge, we discovered another unforgivable truth. My husband had purchased the lodge for $70,000 in cash, hiding this financial move from me. To add insult to injury, a woman with children was living there, seemingly to repay his debt. It became clear he was planning to exploit my ex-girlfriend, who is his own sister, in some sinister scheme. "I'm glad you didn't give him the money, Ashley. If you had, it would undoubtedly have been spent on his mistress," my ex-boyfriend remarked solemnly. "You're right. I never imagined he would hide such a large sum from me. It feels like he's mocking me," I replied bitterly. "Maybe we should confront him together," I suggested. My ex-boyfriend agreed, and together we reached out to his ex-girlfriend. Tearfully, she asked why he had contacted her, but when we revealed what we had discovered, she immediately wanted to meet me. The next day, the three of us shared our first meal together at a family restaurant, our eyes bright with relief at our long-awaited reunion. "I'm sorry I haven't seen you since the wedding. My brother told me not to meet you because you hate me," Michelle said, her voice filled with remorse. "Wait a minute. I never said I hated you. I even suggested to Sam that we should go on a trip together with you," I responded, the realization dawning that Sam had been the one to create a rift between Michelle and me. From the beginning of our marriage, Sam had been deceiving me, and I blamed myself for trusting him. Tears of regret flowed uncontrollably. Seeing me in such distress must have stirred deep emotions in both of them. In the quiet moments that followed, the three of us shared tears together. Speaking on behalf of my ex-boyfriend, I conveyed his feelings to his ex-girlfriend. She admitted her own flaws, saying, "I had a strange kind of pride. I ended up envying my boyfriend's success at work, and as a result, I couldn't be honest and rely on him." It was a sobering realization that a small misunderstanding or assumption between a man and a woman could lead to significant tragedy. From that moment on, they vowed to communicate with greater understanding and consideration for each other. Eventually, they reconciled and got back together. "I'm relieved," I finally admitted, feeling a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had been pondering what to do if things didn't work out, but I'm relieved that everything turned out fine in the end. "Despite the trouble my brother has caused, thank you for helping me. Now it's our turn to support you," my ex-boyfriend said sincerely. 3 days later, the moment arrived to take action. While my husband cheerfully headed off to his reunion, I began packing my belongings. The reunion was set at an inn about 2 hours away by car, with an overnight stay planned until the next evening. Thanks to the assistance of my ex-boyfriend and his girlfriend, I had extra time to carefully sort through and discard the photos that once held cherished memories with my husband. It struck me how love can change. It felt oddly refreshing to let go despite the sentimental value attached to those pictures. In our previous discussions, we decided to sell our house first. It was heartbreaking to part with this place that held so many memories of my father, but I knew he would understand. The following morning, I arranged for a moving company to transport our belongings to my husband's parents' house, accompanied by my ex-boyfriend and his girlfriend. We went to confront my husband and his parents with the truth. Upon hearing the recount, my husband's parents were furious. "We didn't raise a son who deceives his sister and wife like this," they exclaimed, pledging to sever ties with him while embracing me as their true daughter. That day, we spent a pleasant time together at their house. The next day, I received a call from my husband, announcing the end of the reunion and his return. As expected, his voice turned confrontational the moment I put him on speakerphone. "You're not going to give me the house even though I'm trying to take care of my sister?" he demanded. "No, I'm not," I replied firmly. "Then get out of the house by the end of today," he retorted. In the past, I might have been reduced to tears by such words, but this time, I remained composed. I now had strong allies in my ex-boyfriend and my husband's family. Realizing his attempts to regain control were futile, my husband shifted tactics, trying to appease me with pleasantries. However, it was too late for reconciliation. Hours later, he called again, panicked and breathless. "Where did you go? There's only my stuff left. What's happening?" Suddenly, his sister's voice pierced through the phone, accusing him. "It's disgusting how you're trying to turn Ashley's house into a love nest with your mistress." Confusion gripped my husband, and the room fell silent for a moment. After a brief pause, he erupted in a voice tinged with disbelief. "Michelle, is that you? Why are you with Ashley? What's going on?" "I have nothing to say to a brother who betrays his wife without hesitation. Anyway, I'm coming home now," Michelle replied icily, ending the call abruptly. An hour later, she returned with divorce papers signed by my husband Sam. That marked the end. Our family home would be sold in 3 days, and I would receive alimony from Sam. It was a chaotic turn of events, but I believed it was for the best. Since then, I have been staying at my ex-husband's family home, focusing on studying for the caregiving certification I had always wanted to pursue. Meanwhile, my ex-husband sold his log house and now lives quietly in a small apartment with the woman he had an affair with. I feel refreshed and content, knowing that if she's satisfied with him, they can have each other. I am confident that a better person than my ex-husband will enter my life. Keep going, Ashley, I remind myself daily, embracing the fulfilling life I now lead.
I remember the day Lily was born like it was yesterday. I was 8, a skinny girl with wide eyes and a head full of dreams. My parents, John and Sarah, were ordinary folks. Dad worked at a local factory, and Mom stayed at home. Life was simple until Lily came along. "Look at her, Sarah. She's got your eyes," Dad had cooed, holding Lily for the first time. Mom had smiled, a tired but triumphant smile. "And your nose, John." I stood by the door, clutching my ragged doll, waiting for someone to notice me. "Can I see Lily?" I asked timidly. Mom glanced at me, her eyes barely registering my presence. "Not now, Linda. Lily needs rest, and so do I." School wasn't much better. Kids can be cruel when they smell vulnerability. "Hey, Scarecrow Linda," Jack, the class bully, would sneer as he tugged at my faded dress. "Did you get your clothes from the trash?" I tried to ignore them, but words hurt more than punches. At home, Lily grew into a pampered princess. She'd scribble in my textbooks and giggle. "Look, Linda, I'm helping you with homework." I'd sigh. "Lily, please don't do that. I need those for school." One day, she went too far, pouring paint over my only good dress. I yelled at her, but she just cried. That's when Mom stormed in. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "Lily ruined my dress," I said, holding up the stained fabric. Mom didn't even look at the dress. "How dare you yell at your sister? Go to your room, Linda. No dessert for a week." Grandma was the only one who understood. "Don't let them get you down, Linda," she'd say. Her house was my refuge, filled with books and love. She taught me to escape into stories, to live 1,000 lives within those worn pages. The day Grandma passed away was the day I lost my true home. I remember coming back from school, my heart heavy, walking into a house filled with her absence. My parents were in the living room, already talking about her belongings. "We should start clearing out her stuff," Dad said, his voice devoid of any sadness. Mom was looking through a list. "And her library? Those dusty old books?" I lingered at the doorway, listening, a tightness growing in my chest. "Just get rid of them," Dad shrugged. "Who needs all that old paper?" I couldn't hold back anymore. "Can I have Grandma's books?" I blurted out, stepping into the room. Please? They both turned, almost surprised to see me. Sure, take them, Mom said dismissively. We don't have any use for them anyway. I spent the next days transferring Grandma's books to my room, each one a piece of her I wasn't ready to lose. Life moved on in its cruel pace. As high school came to an end, my parents made an offer I didn't expect. We'll pay for your college, Mom announced one evening. You can study accounting or something practical. I remember feeling a mix of surprise and suspicion. Really? Why? I asked. It's our duty, Dad said. Just don't expect any more handouts after this. College was my escape, a chance to be more than just the overlooked sister. But even that came with its price. A few weeks into my part-time job at the library, Mom cornered me. You're making money now. It's only fair you start paying us back for your tuition. I was stunned. But you said you'd pay for my college. I didn't ask for this. Don't be ungrateful, she snapped. Half your salary, that's the deal. The injustice of it burned in me, but I had no choice. Half of what little I earned went straight into their pockets. Years passed in this exhausting cycle: work, study, pay my unfair dues. My graduation was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like a reminder of the shackles I couldn't escape. At the dinner table, with Lily smirking beside me, my parents dropped another bombshell. Now that you're working full-time, we expect you to continue paying us, Dad said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. What? I was incredulous. But I've been paying you all through college. When does this end? It ends when we say it does, Mom said coldly. You owe us, Linda. I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. This isn't fair, I protested. Life isn't fair, Dad retorted. You live under our roof. You follow our rules. And just like that, my dreams of independence, of a life where I could be my own person, were crushed under the weight of their greed and entitlement. In my room that night, surrounded by Grandma's books, I realized the stark contrast between the warmth and love they represented and the cold, calculating nature of my own family. These books were my only legacy, the only thing that connected me to a sense of belonging, of being understood. Life after college became a monotonous cycle of work and fatigue. Every payday, the same scene would unfold at home. Linda, have you got your paycheck yet? Mom would ask, her hand already outstretched, the moment I stepped through the door. I'd hand over half of my earnings without a word. It had become a routine, a bitter pill I swallowed each month. One evening, I mustered the courage to confront them. Mom, Dad, I've been thinking, I began hesitantly. Maybe I can start keeping a bit more of my salary. I need to save up, maybe for a place of my own. Mom's expression hardened. Your own place? Don't be ridiculous. You owe us, Linda. We paid for your education. But I've been paying back. Isn't that enough? I protested, feeling a surge of frustration. Enough? You think a few $1,000s cover your debt to us? Dad's voice rose. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. You owe us for a lifetime. I felt my heart sink. But I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to go to college. And who do you think paid for that? You think that was free? Mom snapped. No, Linda, you'll continue paying us, just as you have been. The unfairness of it all was suffocating. I had hoped, foolishly, that they might see reason, but their entitlement knew no bounds. Lily, ever the favored child, never missed a chance to taunt me. Look at our little accountant, can't even afford a new dress, she'd sneer, flaunting the latest gadget or outfit they'd bought her. I remember one particularly hard day at work. I had stayed late, trying to finish a complex report. Exhausted, I reached home to find my family had ordered takeout, my favorite Thai food. For a moment, my spirits lifted. Is there any left for me? I asked, hopeful, Mom shrugged. You should have been here earlier. Besides, you can buy your own food with your big salary. I retreated to my room, too tired to argue. Dinner that night was a stale sandwich and a cup of tea. Alone in my room, surrounded by the comforting presence of my grandmother's books, I felt the full weight of the life I was trapped in. I longed for more, for freedom, for a chance to live for myself. But every attempt to break free was met with guilt trips and reminders of a debt that I was beginning to realize might not even be mine. My life at home had become a ceaseless routine of work and servitude. Each day, I'd return from my job as an accountant, mentally drained, only to be greeted by the chaos of my family's demands. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. Dad was lounging on the sofa, watching TV, while Lily was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a pile of clothes. "Linda, you're back." Finally, Dad said without looking away from the screen. "Clean up this mess, will you? And start dinner, we're hungry." "But I've just got back from work," I protested weakly, my shoulders slumping. "Work? You call sitting in an office all day work?" Lily scoffed, not bothering to lift her gaze from her phone. "Try doing something useful for a change." Their words stung, but I was too tired to argue. Silently, I began picking up the clothes, my mind heavy with resentment. As I cooked dinner, the familiar sense of injustice gnawed at me. I was more than just their housekeeper, more than their source of income. But in their eyes, I was nothing more than an extension of their will, a means to an end. The next morning, I was met with another list of demands. "Linda, take Lily shopping today. She needs new clothes," Mom instructed as I was about to leave for work. "But I have a busy day at the office," I said, my voice strained with frustration. "Oh, what's more important? Your job or your family?" Mom retorted, her tone sharp. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. My job was important only when it benefited them. Reluctantly, I agreed to take Lily shopping after work, sacrificing the little personal time I had left. At the mall, Lily flitted from store to store, her excitement in stark contrast to my growing despair. "Isn't this dress cute, Linda?" she gushed, holding up an expensive designer dress. "Buy it for me. You owe us, after all." I looked at the price tag and felt a pang in my chest. "Lily, this is too much. I can't afford this." "Can't afford it? But you're the big earner in the family," she taunted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Stop being so stingy." I bought the dress, my heart heavy with the knowledge that this was just another link in the chain that bound me to them. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that my life had become a cycle of giving my time, my money, my energy, with nothing in return. I was trapped in a life of servitude, catering to the whims of a family that saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The day of my 30th birthday dawned just like any other day. I woke up early, hoping maybe, just maybe, this day would be different. That my family would remember and we'd have a small celebration, a moment of happiness. I walked into the kitchen where Mom, Dad, and Lily were already having breakfast. "Good morning," I said softly. Dad glanced up. "Morning. Make sure you're not late for work." I waited, hoping for more, but there was just silence. My heart sank. They had forgotten. It was just another day for them. I tried to hide my disappointment as I prepared my breakfast. The clock ticked away, each second a reminder of how little they cared. As I was about to leave for work, I mustered up the courage to remind them. "You know, today is my birthday," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mom looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before it vanished. "Oh, is it? Well, happy birthday. Don't expect us to throw a party." Lily snickered. "Yeah, happy birthday, Linda. Maybe you can treat yourself to something nice with your big paycheck." Their words stung like 1,000 needles. I left the house, holding back tears, feeling more alone than ever. The day at work was long and tiring. When I returned home, I hoped maybe they'd have a change of heart. But the house was just as I'd left it. I found Mom, Dad, and Lily in the living room, ordering food from a fancy restaurant over the phone. My hopes dissipated like mist. "Are we expecting guests?" I asked, a glimmer of hope reigniting. "No, just felt like ordering something nice," Mom said casually. "You can join us if you want." I watched as they ordered dish after dish, my heart sinking with each click of the phone. Should I get the lobster or the steak? Lily mused aloud. "You should get both," Mom encouraged. I stood there, a bystander in my own home. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday, they didn't care. I retreated to my room, the walls echoing with their laughter and chatter. I sat on my bed, surrounded by Grandma's books, the only gifts I'd ever truly treasured. In the silence of my room, I called my Aunt Mary, the only other person who had ever shown me kindness. She answered with a warm, "Happy birthday, Linda. How are you, dear?" Her words, so simple yet so full of warmth, brought tears to my eyes. We talked for a while, and she shared stories about Grandma, bringing a smile to my face. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "You know, your grandmother would be so proud of you. She always wanted the best for you. That's why she left the money for your education." I was confused. "What money, Aunt Mary?" "The money she saved up for your college. Didn't your parents tell you? She was so determined to give you a good start in life." My world spun. Grandma had paid for my college? All these years, my parents had lied, making me believe I owed them. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The truth was a key, unlocking the chains I'd been bound with for so long. My parents had manipulated me, used me, all based on a lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. The revelation churned in my mind, a mix of anger, betrayal, and a newfound sense of determination. I couldn't let them control me anymore. I had to break free, to find my own path. The next morning, I confronted them. "I know about the money Grandma left for my education. Why did you lie to me?" Their reactions were a mix of shock and defensiveness. "We did what we had to do," Mom said coldly. "We're your parents. It's your duty to support us." "Duty? You lied and made me your servant," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with emotion. Dad just rolled her eyes. "Drama queen. You should be grateful we let you live here." That was the final straw. I was done being their scapegoat, their cash cow. It was time for me to take control of my life. The morning after my birthday was a new beginning. The sun seemed brighter, the air fresher, as if the world was acknowledging my resolve. I had packed my things quietly, trying to avoid any early confrontations. But as I was about to leave, Mom and Lily confronted me in the hallway, blocking my path. "Where do you think you're going with those bags?" Mom asked, her eyes narrowing. "I'm leaving," I stated, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Mom's tone turned pleading. "Linda, you can't do this to us. We're your family. Where will you go?" "Anywhere but here," I said, stepping around them. "I deserve better than this. I deserve a life." As I walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The shackles of guilt and obligation that had held me down for so long were finally broken. I didn't look back. I walked towards the bus stop, my heart filled with a mix of fear and excitement. I was stepping into the unknown, but for the first time, it was a path that I had chosen for myself. On the bus, I called a number I had written down a few months back, an advertisement for an apartment rental. The voice on the other end was friendly and understanding. By the time the bus reached my stop, I had arranged to view the apartment later that day. The apartment was small, but cozy, a stark contrast to the coldness of my family home. As I signed the lease, I felt a sense of ownership and independence I had never experienced before. That night, in my new apartment, surrounded by my grandmother's books, I finally felt at peace. I cooked a simple dinner for myself, enjoying every bite without the weight of judgment or expectation. My phone rang several times that evening, the caller ID showing my family's number. But I didn't answer. I was done letting them control my life. Instead, I curled up on the small sofa with a book, losing myself in a story of adventure and courage. It was like Grandma was there with me, her spirit encouraging me to live the life I was meant to have. In the quiet of my apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would live my life on my own terms, find my own happiness. I would no longer be the overlooked child, but a woman strong, free, and in control of her destiny. Settling into my new apartment was like starting a fresh chapter in my life. I had my own space, and for the first time, I could use my salary for myself. It was a revelation to realize how far my earnings could stretch when I wasn't giving half of it away to my parents and sister. I could afford good food, stylish clothes, and even indulge in a bit of self-care. One of my first acts of independence was giving myself a complete makeover. I got a stylish haircut, something I had always wanted but never dared to do. I bought clothes that made me feel confident and happy. Every morning, I dressed for work with a sense of pride and excitement. At work, my colleagues noticed the change immediately. "Linda, you look fantastic. What's your secret?" Sarah, one of my closest colleagues, asked me one day. "Just enjoying my life and embracing the change," I replied with a smile, feeling a sense of accomplishment. But the most important thing I did after moving out was to take my grandmother's books with me. Those books were more than just literature, they were a connection to the happiest part of my childhood and a reminder of my grandmother's love. Every evening, after returning from work, I would make myself a cup of tea and curl up with a book from Grandma's collection. It was my way of keeping her memory alive and cherishing the love for reading she had instilled in me. Life in my new apartment was peaceful and fulfilling. I relished in the small joys, like cooking my favorite meals, decorating my space, and losing myself in a good book. The sense of freedom was exhilarating. One afternoon, as I was arranging my books on a new shelf, I came across an old photo of my grandmother tucked inside a novel. Tears welled up in my eyes as I held it. I knew she would have been proud of me for finding my own way. I placed the photo on my nightstand, a nightly reminder of where I came from and the strength I carried within me. My grandmother's enduring love and the lessons she taught me were my guiding light. As days turned into weeks, I found myself evolving. I was no longer the overlooked, burdened daughter and sister. I was Linda, an independent woman who had taken control of her life. I had a job that I enjoyed, a cozy home filled with memories, and the freedom to be myself. Life was no longer about surviving, it was about living, thriving, and finding joy in the little things. My transformation was not just external, it was a deep, internal change that had reshaped my view of the world and myself. Every morning, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a confident, happy woman staring back at me. I was finally at peace, living a life that was truly my own. I had been living in my new apartment for a month when my phone rang one evening. The caller ID flashed my parents' number, a sight that now stirred a mix of emotions. Bracing myself, I answered. "Linda, this is ridiculous. You need to come back home. We can't manage without the money you were giving us." Mom's voice was both pleading and demanding. "I'm sorry you're finding things tough, but I've moved on. Maybe it's time you both looked for jobs," I suggested, trying to keep my voice calm. "How dare you talk to us like that? After all we've done for you?" My dad's voice boomed through the speaker. "I've done my part for years. It's time for you to take responsibility for your own lives," I replied firmly. Their response was a barrage of insults and accusations, but I held my ground. "I'm not responsible for your financial problems," I repeated before ending the call. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Opening it, I found my sister Lily standing there, her expression one of expectancy. "Linda, I need money for a new gadget. Just transfer it to me like before," she said, as if nothing had changed. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Lily, I'm not your personal bank anymore. You should try earning your own money." Her reaction was immediate and intense. She began screaming at me, hurling insults and accusations. "You owe us. You're just a selfish, heartless monster." Her screams were so loud that they attracted the attention of my neighbors. Concerned, one of them called the police. Soon, 2 officers were at my door, questioning us about the commotion. After explaining the situation, the officers escorted Lily out, who continued her tirade even as she was led away. I blocked my family's numbers on my phone after that. I was done being their scapegoat and ATM. The next few weeks brought whispers of my family's worsening situation. Mutual acquaintances shared stories of their mounting debts and desperate attempts to find money. My parents, who had never worked a day since I started earning, were now doing odd jobs. Lily, too, found herself in a situation she had never imagined. The sister who once mocked me for my old clothes was now selling her designer outfits and expensive gadgets just to make ends meet. Despite a fleeting sense of pity, I reminded myself of their years of neglect and exploitation. They had chosen this path, and it was their responsibility to navigate it. In my world, life was blossoming. My job was going well, and I was enjoying my newfound freedom and independence. My apartment, once a distant dream, was now my haven of peace, filled with memories of my grandmother and her books. One evening, as I sat in my reading nook, a sense of profound contentment washed over me. The once overlooked and undervalued daughter had transformed into an independent woman. I had broken free from the chains of familial manipulation and emerged stronger. My name is Kate. Life's got a real funny way of showing you who's boss. Just a short while back, I'd tell you I was hitched to James. You'd see me coming down the hall, with that just married kind of glow. I had faith that quitting my gig at Lauren Tech for our marriage was the smart play. Love trumps a paycheck, right? Lauren Tech was this quirky joint. God knows, they had more rules than a prison. One of them serious deal breakers was about family. James put a ring on it and, boom, we're suddenly in the hot seat. Bossman Joe pulls us in, hands us the ultimatum like we're on some second-rate game show. "One of you's gotta roll out," he said, face as serious as a heart attack. We had a back and forth that night that would have made for prime reality TV drama. I guess love made me a little stupid. I blinked first and tendered my papers the next day. Threw in the towel on my up-and-coming tech career to play house. If I knew then what I know now, well, ain't that just life's tagline? Flash to today, and here I am sweeping up cereal because Mr. Promotion on the horizon can't find it in his heart to aim for the bowl. "Jim, your mother teach you that?" I called out to the other room, my voice getting lost somewhere in the drywall. "What's that?" he shot back, voice all tight, like my question was a personal attack. "Never mind," I muttered, letting it drop. Not worth the hassle. Used to be we could rib each other. Now every word's like stepping on a landmine. Lovely, huh? 2 hours later, he's on the couch, all zoned out in front of the TV, and I'm assessing the remains of what used to be us. "We gonna talk or you planning on marrying the couch?" I said. James didn't even bother looking my way. "About what?" I counted to 10 in my head. "I dunno, how about us? Where this train wreck's heading?" He shrugged. "Thought we were good." We stewed in that silence for a while, the TV chattering away to itself. Then it hit me, the realization I'd been living in a glass house someone else threw a rock at. Everything we built, up in smoke, and neither of us knew how to stop the burn. It's funny, ain't it? How fast a life can turn on its head. One day you're planning forever, Next day you can't even chat about the weather without it turning into World War III. I stood there a while longer, looking at the man on the couch. He was as familiar as a stranger on a bus. The transition from indifference to cruelty was subtle, but I felt it. It was in the cooling air of the disbanded summer and the sting of a slight wind. Things started changing, like the weather. In the kitchen, I stood there thinking about how things used to be smooth and easy. But now? It felt like walking on ice, unsure if you'll stand or fall. I knew the kind of steak James liked, rare and yet not too bloody, salted and peppered with precision. I had it down to an art, but that day, the oven betrayed me, or maybe it was the other way around. James walked in from the living room, the sound of his heavy footsteps warning me of the mood he was in before he even entered. A second later, there he was, filling the doorway, his eyes taking in the spread as if he was about to pounce on it and tear it apart with his hands rather than sit down to eat like a civilized person. "What's this?" He pointed at the plate. "Your job too tough for you now?" His voice was like gravel, rough and scraping. I knew to tread carefully. "It's just a bit cooler than usual, James." "The steak, I mean. It's not." "Not what?" He cut me off, glaring. I bit my lip, not saying what was on my mind, because voicing it out loud would only make it worse. "Look, Kate," he said, his voice lowering, like that of a predator hiding in the shadows. "When I say I want my steak hot, I mean I want to feel the animal's soul leaving the body when I cut into it. This," he tapped the steak with the back of the fork, and it sounded like a judge's gavel. "This is dead twice over." He didn't yell, but his voice had a sharpness to it that made my skin crawl. It was almost clinical, detached yet loaded with a venom that was reserved just for me. No loud scene, no drama for the outside world, just the cold, hard words that cut through me. I stayed silent, knowing anything I said would just fan the flames. He pushed the plate away, and his downcast eyes met mine, full of something icy. "Son of a... you know what, forget it." He turned his back on me and the food. "I'm not eating this crap." He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, his movements jerky. "Fix your mistakes, Kate. Or next time it'll be more than just dinner in the trash." The door slammed, a period mark to the tail end of the happiness we used to have. I was left there, staring at the closed door, the click of the latch loud in the quiet of the apartment. As his footsteps faded, I let out the breath I was holding. The steak. It just laid there, looking as forlorn as I felt. The trash can was the next thing I'd have to face, a cold reminder of my mistake. Throwing it away felt like I was tossing a part of myself with it, my effort, my care, my desire to make things work. But none of it seemed to matter. Perfect, they called us. His parents, our friends, they all admired the facade we put up. But behind closed doors, the story was different. Demands grew as my self-esteem plunged. James' favorite pastime became scrutinizing every corner of the house, every dish I prepared. I had no job, no income, just him and his approval, which became scarcer with each passing day. And on the nights his parents witnessed an act slightly less convincing than usual, the sofa was my cold reminder of failing to play the doting wife. Tonight was no different. The dinner table was set for two plus his ever-judging eyes. "What's this?" James's voice was flat, pointing at the steamed broccoli. "Dinner," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Broccoli again? Don't you know anything else?" he scoffed, pushing the plate away. I bit back a sharper reply, knowing it wouldn't help. "I'll make something else if you're not happy with it." "That'd be a first," he muttered. The retort stung, fueling a silent anger inside me. I turned back to the kitchen, feeling his gaze on my every move. "Where are you going?" he barked. "I said I'd make you something else, didn't I?" My voice carried a hint of defiance I didn't know I had left. James stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Sit down. Let's not pretend like you've got other things to do." Your world revolves around me, remember? His words were a leash, pulling me back. Yeah, I remember. I heard him sit back down. No, sorry, no, thank you. Just a heavy silence that settled over us like dust. As the night dragged on, so did his critique. This house is a mess, he announced, seemingly out of nowhere. I followed his gaze. The books on the coffee table weren't perfectly aligned, a pillow was slightly askew. Life happened in our house. But not the life he wanted. Clean it up. I wanted to scream. To tell him a house lived in would never meet his pristine standards. Instead, I fixed the pillow, straightened the books, and swallowed the lump in my throat. The place could use some work, I muttered under my breath. What was that? His voice had a sharp edge. Nothing, I said quickly, louder now. Just talking to myself. He eyed me with suspicion, but said nothing more. In bed, I lay awake, staring at the darkness. The chasm between us was filled with unspoken thoughts and stifled dreams. I thought of all the words I wanted to say, the accusations, the hurt, anger, and all the wishes for a life that felt like it was slowly slipping away from my grasp. I was tethered, bound by invisible chains of dependency and fear. Perfect, they said. But perfect was just a word, and words were the cheapest currency in the economy of our sham of a marriage. So there I was, just a regular day heading back from the store, arms loaded with groceries. Never did it cross my mind that a bit of ice on the sidewalk would land me square on my rear, but life's got a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? Down I went with a nasty slip, and the pain shot right through my leg like nothing I've felt before. I tried to get up, but no dice. My leg was having none of it, throbbing like mad. That's when a couple of folks came rushing over. You alright? They asked. Must have seen the whole clumsy show. Trying to keep my cool, I just nodded. I think I busted my leg. They didn't think twice and hailed down a cab to whisk me to the hospital. At the ER, it was a circus. Nurses took their sweet time before a doc finally got to me. He had just one look at my leg and his face said it all before his mouth did. It's broken, he told me, matter of fact like he was talking about the weather. I grimaced, not at the news, but at the thought of facing James with this. While waiting for the docs to do their thing, I figured I should let my husband know, but the dude didn't pick up his phone. Sent him a text, broke my leg, at the hospital, short and sweet, but not even a peep back from him. Turns out, I was stuck there till morning, and the hospital was no hotel, that's for sure. All I got was cold coffee and a nurse who seemed like she'd rather be anywhere else. As soon as I could hobble, they shoved some papers at me to sign and sent me packing in a cab. Back home, the cast was as white as the snow outside and twice as annoying. James was waiting, his face like a thundercloud ready to burst. No, how you doing or what happened, he just goes. Where's dinner? Really? I'm standing there on crutches, leg in a cast, and he's all mad about dinner? I snapped back. What do you think? I went dancing. Look at my leg. But he's on a roll, acting like I did it on purpose. You always have excuses, he sneered. Can't even do the one thing you're supposed to. Can you believe that? After a night in the ER, all he cared about was his stupid dinner. The whole thing was too much. There I was, hurt and shaking, and he couldn't care less. The air was as cold as that patch of ice I'd slipped on, and I knew right then, this was more than just a broken leg. It was like the ice under us had cracked wide open. I hauled myself toward the kitchen table, crutch by crutch, as if every step was a mile. I was cooking dinner for my beloved husband, it's funny. The bin was near overflowing, and I'd missed it. It was a tiny slip-up, but with James, nothing was ever tiny. What's this now? James barked, catching the sight of the unemptied bin. You're home all day, and you can't even manage the simplest tasks. He stormed over, all bluster and rage, and with one swift motion, toppled the bin, its contents sprawling like a small-scale disaster at my feet. Clean it up, he thundered. My fingers shook as I reached down, but not from the physical pain of my injury. It was something deeper, a crack in something that had once been whole. That night was sleepless, the echoes of his voice blending with the hot sting of tears. Morning came with no comfort, just the light revealing the mess of last night. I sat at the kitchen table, papers in front of me, the sound of coffee dripping in the background. James stumbled in, the stink of beer still on him from last night. "Morning," he growled, his voice like gravel. "What's for breakfast?" I pushed the papers toward him. "I've got your breakfast right here." He squinted down at the divorce papers, unreadable for a moment. Then he looked up, a sly, mocking smile spreading across his face. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," I said. Though inside, my heart was racing, like it could bust out of my chest. He threw his head back and laughed, rough and loud. "You ain't got the guts." I clenched my jaw. My voice came out low and steadfast. "Already did it. Just need your sign off." He leaned down, face inches from mine. "You think you can survive without me? You're a broken bird, can't even take out the trash." "I'm done talking, James," I said, meeting his stare. "Sign the papers, or I'll have the law make you sign." He scoffed, grabbed the pen with a squeezed grip, and scrawled his name, each stroke heavy and deliberate. He threw the pen down like it was on fire. "Good luck, darling," he sneered. "You'll be crawling back, before the month's up." But I wouldn't. I couldn't. This was my line in the sand, the overflowing bin that couldn't take more trash, more lies. Despite everything, I smiled, because that paper felt like the first step on crutches toward a different life. "Crawling's not my style," I said quietly. When I opened my eyes the next morning, everything was too quiet. Too calm. It was weird waking up to silence when inside, I felt like everything was about to blow. That's when he told me. Over a cup of coffee, he said we had to get the property split locked down. And, oh boy, he already had a lawyer in mind. Some hotshot in the city, near Lauren Tech. "You coming with me?" he said, not asking. "We'll get this done today." I really didn't have much of a say with my leg all broken and useless, so I just nodded. He helped me into the car, propped up my cast, and off we went. Everything was fine, normal even, until it wasn't. We were zipping down the highway, the city in the distance, like a bunch of toy buildings. Then he pulled over, sudden-like. Said the wheel needed air. "I'll check it out," he mumbled. The next thing I know, he told me to get out of the car. "Just want to make sure we are safe." His tone was off, and not in a good way. But I got out, leaning on the car for support and feeling every bit as fragile as my plastered leg. He fiddled around by the tires for a minute, and then, without any kind of warning, hopped back in and hit the gas. I mean, he took off so fast I barely had time to shout. So there I was, out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the sound of his car disappearing down the highway. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? I didn't have to think twice. My phone was in my hand, and I was hitting record. When he picked up, he was all smug. I've never hated the sound of a voice more. "Come back," I yelled. "This isn't funny." But he just laughed. Actually laughed. Said something about me getting what I deserved for wanting a divorce. Can you believe that? The line went dead, and the weight of what just happened slammed into me like a brick wall. I stood there on the side of the road, watching the taillights of his car disappear into a blurred speck in the distance. I was alone, miles from anything that resembled civilization. The chill in my bones went deeper than the winter's touch. It was the harsh truth gnawing at me. I was truly on my own. Cars whizzed by, each one felt like a sting. None of them stopped. Why would they? It's not their drama, not their craziness to deal with. I was just some woman on crutches on the side of the road to them. The chill was setting in, biting through my jacket as the minutes dragged on. There wasn't a soul in sight until a gorgeous Jeep truck rattled to a halt beside me. Behind the wheel was the one I least expected to see here. My former boss, Joe. As the car's heater blasted warm air, I could feel my cheeks and hands start to regain some feeling. Joe glanced over at me, his brow heavy with concern. "You look like crap, Kate, you know that?" he said, gruff, but kindly. "Why the hell didn't you call someone?" I shrugged, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. "Thought I could handle it," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "He left you on the side of the road with a broken leg?" His voice rose, incredulous and angry. "That James is a damn coward." I nodded, hugging myself tighter as I remembered the icy wind and the pain. "Yeah, I guess he is." We reached Lauren Tech, and Joe practically carried me up to the 5th floor. The familiar sounds of the workplace surrounded me, a jarring yet comforting reminder of a life I once knew. Inside his office, Joe handed me a mug of coffee, which I clutched gratefully between my hands. The aroma was a heady promise of warmth. "Thanks, Joe," I said after taking a tentative sip. The coffee was strong, just the way I liked it, a sharp contrast to the bitter cold I had endured. He grunted, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Can't believe that bastard. After everything." "Let's not talk about him," I interjected, keen to avoid going down that road. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a comfortable silence, born from years of working together and understanding the ebb and flow of each other's moods. Joe finally stopped pacing and turned to face me. "What are you going to do now, Kate?" His tone was serious, the playful edge gone. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling lost. "I really don't know." His gaze softened, and he took the seat across from me. "Look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. We could use you back here. The team hasn't been the same since you left." A spark of something, hope, maybe, or just surprise, fluttered in my chest. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," he said dryly. "You were one of the best. Hell, you are the best. I should have fought harder to keep you." I smiled weakly, both warmed and overwhelmed by his offer. "Wouldn't be easy with my leg like this." "We'll manage. I'll wait until you're back on your feet, literally." He leaned forward, a determined glint in his eyes. I'm not taking no for an answer. The toughness of his words, the undeniable command in his voice, it felt reassuring. Against the backdrop of uncertainty and pain, his offer was a beacon. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing full well I'd already made up my mind. "I'll think about it," I repeated, allowing a smile to play on my lips. Joe grunted in response, a sound that conveyed understanding and a touch of impatience. Having a purpose, a place to be, and the support of someone who believed in me was more than I could have hoped for given the day's events. It was an unexpected turn, but maybe, just maybe, it was the kind I needed. The air was thick with tension when James headed for the boss's door. The clump of his boots was more hesitant today, like he sensed the storm brewing. He pushed the door, and it creaked open, announcing his arrival to what was once his throne room. There I was, leaning against the desk, arms folded, waiting. "James, come in, shut the door behind you," the boss said, his voice an even, ironed-out calm. James saw me and turned pale, but quickly pulled himself together. "What's this about?" he grumbled like a cornered animal, ready to bite. The boss gestured to the chair, but James didn't sit. Instead, he crossed his arms, a mirror image of my stance, but filled with defiance where mine held determination. "James," the boss started, fixing him with a look that could freeze hell over. "I always thought of you as a sharp man. But what you've done? That's the sharpest kind of stupid." James shot a glance at me, a mix of fear and anger in his eyes. "So, she's been yapping, has she? What lies has she been selling?" "No lies needed, mate," I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "Just played him the greatest hits of your ugly symphony. You've been recorded, clear as day." The boss reached into his desk, pulled out a recording device, and slid it across the table. "Care to listen for nostalgia?" James's face turned the color of concrete. "You can't do this. You can't fire me over." "Over what, James? Over you terrorizing your wife, my employee?" "Oh, I can. And I am." The boss cut in, his voice cold steel. James's eyes darted between the two of us, looking for some crack in the armor, some slip of weakness. But there wasn't one. "I'll take you to court," he spat out. "That's funny," I said with a cold laugh, "'cause that's exactly where we're going. Only difference is, I've got a bed of evidence, and you've got nothing but lies and empty threats." The boss stood up, the chair screeching against the floor like a war cry. "Get out of my office, and get out of our lives. You're finished here." And with that, James's fate was sealed. In the courtroom, the evidence weighed heavier than his words, heavier than his anger. The judge didn't hesitate, hitting the gavel like a nail in the coffin of our married life. "Sentence you to pay the compensation, and this court grants the separation," the judge announced, and it was like the first breath of spring air, chilly but promising blooms. Back at the job, I slid into the familiar groove of my work, but with a new shine on it. I wasn't just doing tasks, I was rebuilding. Every keystroke was a brick, every good morning mortar, every completed project a pillar in the house of my new life. "Kate," my colleague Mark said, breaking my concentration. "Must feel weird, huh? Getting everything back?" I swiveled in my chair, facing him. "Weird doesn't start to cover it, Mark. Feels like I've come back from the dead." Mark chuckled, his laughter rumbling like an old pickup truck. "Zombie Kate, back for revenge." I cracked a smile. "Something like that. Only this time I'm not taking any crap from anyone. No more Mrs. Nice Gal." "That's the spirit. You know, we all got your back here, no matter what." I nodded. The warmth in the office was more than the heating. It was the camaraderie, a shared fortress against any storm that might come. "Hi, I'm Marie. Mom and wife full-time, that's me. Paul, that's my husband, works a trading gig, and let's just say he's married to his job just as much as he is to me. Used to scribble down thoughts on books, reading between and beyond the lines, but these days I'm more about reading bedtime stories to our boy, Jack. Life threw some curveballs early on, lost my parents when I still needed them. That was rough. Then along came Paul, with a family in tow. His folks were the real deal, good people, you know. Took me in, no questions. Made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere again. Been with Paul for years now, since those college days when love seemed to be enough to fill any void. We settled into a rhythm, he at work and me taking care of everything else. But man, did that rhythm skip and stumble when Jack came into the picture. Paul changed, or maybe this was always him, just waiting for a reason to surface. He'd come home on a Friday night with a few too many drinks in him, loose-lipped and surly. "You gotta start shedding that weight, Marie," he'd snipe after slipping off his tie. "You barely fit in those jeans anymore." I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, but I told myself to brush it off, toughen up, maybe he'd cool down by morning. But mornings just brought hangovers and silence until the next round. The house became this place where I tiptoed, trying not to set Paul off. Jack, little trooper, he could feel it too, sticking close, watching his old man with wide, careful eyes. One particularly rough Friday, Paul came home and made a beeline for the fridge, crack open a cold one. I was on the floor with Jack, blocks scattered around. "Another day in paradise, huh?" Paul sneered, leaning against the counter. I forced a smile. Just the usual, you know, chasing after this little tornado. I ruffled Jack's hair, but my heart wasn't in it. Paul tossed his head back, downing half the bottle. "Maybe put some of that energy into a workout routine, eh?" I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'll look into it," was all I managed, shuffling Jack into his pile of toys, anything to escape the cutting edge in Paul's tone. But the weight wasn't just on my hips, it was on my chest, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know who I was in Paul's eyes anymore. I had finally shaken off those last stubborn pounds. It felt good, kind of. But Paul, well, he had a talent for finding flaws. My sweats and baggy tees were the new target. Jesus, Marie, you dress like you're living at the gym. When was the last time you dressed up? Remember how you used to look? There he was, leaning on the doorframe with that look that said everything his words didn't. I glanced down at my stretched-out mom life tee and yoga pants. This is just practical, Paul. You want me all dolled up to do laundry and wrangle our son? One corner of his mouth curled up like he had just made a successful trade. I dunno, how about looking good for your husband? That used to matter. I sighed, rolling my eyes. Well, unless my husband starts taking meetings at the playground or the grocery store, I think I'll stick with practical. He shook his head, chuckling without humor. You used to care, Marie. His voice trailed off as he wandered back toward the living room, his disapproval hanging in the air like a bad smell. Then there was Jack, our boy, trying to navigate the shaky terrain between us. I was teaching him please and thank you, thinking manners mattered. Paul caught a bit of our lesson one afternoon and scoffed. Look at you, teaching him to be Mr. Manners. You want him to get trampled on? Manners are important, Paul. It's about respect, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Respect is earned, not politeness the least, he shot back. He needs to toughen up, not be some yes, please pushover. Then the whole freeloader thing started. One night, Paul came home, askew, looking like he had won and lost the same fight. Nice day? He asked, sarcasm heavy as he glanced around what I'd come to see as our minefield of a home. I put down Jack's toy and braced for what was coming. Just the same, dealing with tantrums and spills. How was work? Paul's laugh was short and sharp. Work? Oh, it was just dandy, supporting a parasite. My cheeks burned. Excuse me? My voice was a little too loud. Jack's eyes flitted from me to Paul, sensing the shift. A parasite, Marie. I work, you play house, he said, each word pointed and heavy. That's the thanks I get? I am raising our child, Paul. Your child. That's work. That's vital, I said, my voice rising now, too. Jack started fussing then, picking up on the tension. I swept him up into my arms, trying to shield him from the fallout. Paul had a knack for knowing when he'd pushed too far, and his next words were more measured. Marie, I go out there and deal with sharks all day. Come home, and what? I don't know, something different. I can't be your one-man show, Paul, I said softly, trying to defuse the bomb that our marriage had become. I'm here, juggling a million things for us, for Jack. We looked at each other then, really looked, and I wondered if he saw the plea in my eyes. The help me, back me up, be with me that I felt screaming inside. But he turned away, the finality of his silence telling me that no, he didn't see. He didn't want to. One day, the disrespect boiled over. Jack scrunched up his little face and called me a name, a real zinger. He got it from Paul. You're just a lazy bum, he had hurled at me, his tiny voice bitter and angry. I felt like I'd been slapped. What? Jack, no, you can't say that, I stumbled, shocked. He folded his arms, stubborn as his dad. Dad says it, so can I. That was the last straw. When Paul got home, I was waiting, steaming like a forgotten kettle. You know what your son called me today? I laid into him without waiting for an answer. Paul dropped his keys on the counter and chuckled, clearly not seeing the line had been crossed. What did he say? The truth? He tossed his words over his shoulder as he walked to the fridge, his casualness like acid on my skin. Is that funny to you? I was shouting now, my usual restraint snapped tight as a dry twig. Your son is calling me names. Paul leaned against the kitchen counter, beer in hand, a smirk blooming on his face. Oh, come on, Marie. Kid's gotta learn to stand his ground. I was staring at him, hands balled into fists. By disrespecting his mother? He shrugged, a lazy lift of his shoulders that sent me teetering on the edge. You're too soft on him. Look, he's getting some spine. Spine? My voice shot up another octave. He's learning to be just like you. Paul grinned and ruffled Jack's hair. Ain't that right, champ? I turned to Jack, who was looking at us with eyes that were too old for his face. Jack, listen to me. What you said to me this morning was wrong. You can't talk to people like that. Jack's chin jutted out, defiant and stubborn. But Dad. I don't care what Dad says, you listen to your mom. I cut him off, my heart thudding like a drum. I was desperate for him not to follow in Paul's footsteps. But Paul wasn't letting it go. The boy's gotta learn to speak up. World's not gonna hand him anything. You keep coddling him, he'll end up. I get it, all right? I get it. I cut him off, feeling the weight of his words like a physical thing on my chest. But there's a line. You don't get it, do you? Paul threw up his hands, that ugly smirk still there. Whatever, Marie. You make mountains out of molehills. I turned from him, that burning in my chest now a churning mess. This is not how I want our son to grow up. This disrespect ends now, it ends here. Paul just took a swig of his beer, and I knew, right then, my words were just bouncing off him. I looked at Jack, really looked at him. You apologize to me, now, I said, the power in my voice surprising even me. Jack's eyes darted between me and Paul, but he knew that tone. Sorry, Mom. The word was small, almost lost in the kitchen, but it was there and it was a start. I moved closer to Jack, knelt down so I was eye level with him. Thank you. We treat each other with respect in this house, you got it? Paul snorted behind me, but I ignored him. Jack nodded, a hint of my boy peeking through that new sullen shadow he wore. It was a crack in the wall Paul was building around him, a crack, but also a starting point. I stood up, squared my shoulders. We're going to fix this, Jack. No more name-calling, no more disrespect. We're better than that. I took Jack's hand, and we left the room, leaving Paul and his smugness behind us. I stood there on the sidewalk, my phone shaking in my hand. It was one of those moments where your gut ties up in knots. There, across the street, Paul was laughing it up with some woman. Blonde, curvy, and looking at my husband like he was the last piece of chocolate in the box. My thumb pressed record before I even decided to. The walk home felt a million miles long. A part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Back in our kitchen, I threw my keys on the counter. Paul was sitting there with a beer, like he always did, but today the sight of him made me sick. Without a word, I tossed my phone on the table in front of him, the video playing. Care to explain? Paul looked at the screen, his eyes going hard when he saw what was on it. He muted it, placed it calmly on the counter, and then looked straight at me. Yeah, she's beautiful, he said, his voice dripping venom. You used to be like that. I felt the slap of his words, my cheeks flaming with anger, my body tense. So, that's it, huh? You parade around town with some woman while I'm at home? Paul stood up, his chair scraping back against the tile. He was too close now, his voice low and mean. What, you stalking me now, Marie? Can't handle the fact that maybe there's more out there than what's inside these walls? I was reeling, feeling the pieces click together. Cut the crap, Paul. You're cheating. He didn't even flinch. You wanna know why, he said, his chest puffing up. Because around her, I'm somebody. Not just the guy who pays the bills or the bad guy 'cause he ain't Mr. Rogers. So that's it? I edged back, feeling the counter dig into my hips. Your family's not enough for you? Paul snorted and grabbed his beer again. It stopped being enough a long time ago. Maybe if you'd have kept up with yourself, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. The bile rattled in my throat. I'm not the one who promised till death do us part. His laugh was short and punched the air. Those are just words, Marie. They stopped meaning anything to you a long time ago. I should have been crying, but the tears wouldn't come. I was just empty and angry. I gave you everything, Paul. I gave you a son, I made a home for us. And this is how you repay me? He took a long drink, then leaned back against the counter. You gave me a home? Looks like a prison to me. Same old, every damn day. You think that's a life? We made vows, Paul. I shouted, my voice cracking. Yeah, and you broke them every day with your sweatpants and constant nagging. His face twisted into something ugly, something monstrous. That was the last thing he said before I walked out, my heart numb, anger seeping into every corner of my being. I was on edge the whole ride over to Paul's folks' place. It was gonna be nasty, but I had to lay it out for them. They needed to know who their son really was. His mom answered the door, with a happy smile. Marie, what brings you here at this hour? I just barreled past her. I gotta show you both something. Once his dad came in, I played them the video straight up. His mom gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. His dad, red-faced and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, he barked at me, Paul's gotta stop this nonsense now. And like that, all hell broke loose. That night back at our place, Paul kicked off as soon as I walked in. You had to drag my parents into this, didn't ya? His voice was loaded, ready to fire. Yeah, well someone's got to. I shot back, my nerves steel. He was a storm brewing. With a step towards me, his hand raised, but he didn't get far. You're bad. Jack's voice cut through, strong and braver than any of us. Paul stopped stone cold. Paul's hand dropped, and his mask slipped a second, shock in his eyes. But then he hardened up again, cold as steel. I want you out, he said, spitting the words like they were sour. Take the kid and go. So we went. With Jack's hand in mine, I didn't look back. Bags thrown in the back of the car, we headed for the city, miles of road unwinding like my thoughts. The luxury house was something else, my unexpected inheritance. 2 stories, white columns, and a porch you could throw a party on, all waiting in another city, away from everything that had gone wrong. None of my folks, not even a whisker of Paul or his clan, had ever set eyes on it. When we pulled up to this grand house, Jack's face pressed to the window, eyes as wide as the moon. Is this a castle? His voice was a whisper, almost lost in the vastness of it all. Something like that, I said, a laugh escaping me for the first time in. I couldn't even remember. We stepped into that house, our new beginning. It was silent, save for the echo of our footsteps on the marble floors, bouncing off the high ceilings crowned with crystal chandeliers. The furniture was swanky, left behind by folks I wish had lasted a lifetime longer. I plopped down on a couch soft as clouds, and finally, Jack's laughter filled the rooms. The sound of it was more luxurious than anything else in this place. We explored room after room, Jack running ahead like he was leading a parade. Each new door opened to a room grander than the last. I call the biggest one, he declared, claiming a bedroom that overlooked a garden already blooming with the promise of spring. Laying him down to bed that night, the day finally caught up with me. My eyes burned with the tiredness of it all, but looking around at the high ceilings, the gold trimming catching moonlight, I knew we were worlds away from where we started. Sitting there, in the quiet of a room too nice for today's shadows, I whispered into the darkness, "We made it, kiddo." Life in the big house slowly shed the shadows of the past. Jack's giggles filled the halls more than the echoes of old fears. Most days, it felt like we had always been there, just the two of us, in our new safe haven. The house, with its silent strength, was keeping the world at bay, until the day Paul showed up, uninvited and unwelcome. He was at the door in a storm of anger. I opened it and there he was, looking like trouble had followed him around. "You can't just disappear with my son, Marie." I leaned against the door frame, unfazed. "He's my son too. And I didn't disappear. I moved on." Paul's scowl deepened. He glanced around, taking in the opulence of the place with wide, disbelieving eyes. How can you afford this? I know you don't make this kind of dough. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Well, turns out I had a little left over each month. Who knew? He raised an eyebrow, a sly accusation in his gaze. And I'm struggling to cover rent for that old place by myself. It's damn near impossible now that they jacked up the price. I shook my head. He always was good at playing the martyr. That's not my problem anymore, Paul. I've been using my own savings to cover the gap in the rent for years. Savings that, thank God, I don't need to bleed dry for that house anymore. The greed in his eyes flared up like wildfire. What, and you're living here in luxury while I... Stop right there, I cut in. This isn't your concern. This, I motioned to the grand house behind me, is mine. Mine and Jack's. Paul took a step forward, but I didn't back down. Look, I came here to fix things. I'm saying I forgive you for all this, sneaking around. His audacity almost knocked the wind out of me, but I had a little surprise that would put the brakes on his charade. From behind the door, I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them into his chest. And here's what I'm saying. We're done. He looked as if I'd slapped him with a physical hand, his face twisting through confusion, rage, and then settling on calculating desperation. You can't do this. What about Jack? I stood taller, my resolve like iron. I'm doing it for Jack. He doesn't need this chaos you bring. Sign the papers, Paul. It's over. He glanced from the papers to me, then back again, his posture deflating slightly. You'll regret this. You can't make it alone. That's where you're wrong. I smiled, not from humor but from a deep-seated confidence. I'm already making it, and without you, we're doing more than just fine. We're thriving. With a shake of his head, Paul looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode away, clutching the papers like they were a snake that could bite. Once he was gone, the house seemed to exhale with me. I closed the door gently, turning back to the life I had fought so hard for. Life had a way of tossing stuff at you, hard and fast. It was Thursday, the kind of day that should have been easy, but it wasn't. We shirked dinner for a bit, setting up ramps out of old books and watching the Lego car stupidly do flips and land upside down. Jack's laugh was infectious, the sort that wiped clean the worry lines off my face. His enthusiasm was a reminder that amid all the crap, there was still good, simple, unadulterated good. Then it came, a banging on the door that made my stomach drop and my face lose all its motherly warmth. Paul had a knack for bad timing and worse entrances. I pulled the door open and there he was, looking like he'd just come from a bar fight or lost a bet. Paul, what's up? He scowled, that usual look he gets when he thinks the world owes him. So, this the high life? You playing house with my Jack while I'm scraping pennies just to get by? Jack peeked from behind me, a knight in Lego armor. Hey, screw off, Paul. Don't talk to my mom like that. Paul's face turned a nice shade of tomato. The hell? You let him talk like that? I stood there, hands on hips. He's expressing himself. Something I should have done with you a long time ago. Jack came out from behind me, all fierce. Yeah, get lost. My mom, my rules. Paul's anger was something else, a storm that had nowhere to go. You think you're smart, huh? Talking to your old man like that. Jack squared his shoulders, a small David to Paul's Goliath. Don't gotta think. I know it. Mom knows it. Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There was Jack, staring him down, waiting. This was no place for Paul anymore, no place for his bluster and noise. After a tense moment, Paul shook his head, muttered something under his breath and stormed off the porch. Jack turned to me with this look, the kind of look that said, "We got this." I nodded, all the agreement he needed. We went back to boiling pasta and racing Lego cars. That's how we do it, simple, nothing fancy. We just keep on. I was gabbing on the phone with Miss Dottie, Paul's mom, who was more my family than is now. Honey, you just holler if there's anything you need, 'kay? Her voice was always a warm blanket over the line. We're all good, Miss Dottie. Really, couldn't be better, I assured her, twisting the cord around my finger. She hummed a pleased note. Just makes my heart full to hear that. Keep on keeping on, you hear? Frank, her husband, yelled from somewhere behind her. Tell her that any time she wants to send over some of that lemon meringue, we won't complain. A genuine laugh burst out of me. Expect a pie on your doorstep soon, Frank. Exchanging a few more pleasantries, we hung up. I shook my head. If someone had told me last year I'd be mining gold from the wreckage of my married life, I would have laughed in their face. Jack pulled on my sleeve, waving his drawing like a five-star general. Look, Mom. This is our house. I looked down. His scribbles had heart. A big square house and two stick figures, a little one and a tall one, with sloppy grins and a lopsided sun shining down. The swing I'd put up for him stood out in green and brown strokes. That's us, right? A dumb question, really, but it made him nod with pride. And I'm gonna sell my art, make us rich. There was serious conviction behind his toothy smile. If you do, you're buying me that fancy coffee I've been eyeing? I nudged him with a wink. He nodded, his expression all business. Only the best for my mom. And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened a bit more. Sundays were like that, full of little miracles. The thing was, life had done a real number on us, but it was looking up. Paul got slammed by the door he let hit him on his way out. The fancy house he rented to impress his mistress? Turned out to be a couple of sizes too big for his wallet. Now he was cooped up in a tiny apartment, the kind of place his pride wouldn't have let him consider a year ago. And the mistress? She hightailed it the minute his pockets turned up empty and his promises hollow. But that was a tale for some other time. Right now was about Jack and me, and the park we were marching to, hand in hand. We stepped out, and the door clicked shut, a soft full stop to one chapter before immediately kicking off the next. Jack tugged me towards the park, his excitement bubbling over. I didn't glance back at our home, no need. Ahead was everything that mattered, me and my boy, parts of a world that kept on spinning, even when you felt like you'd fallen off. Life had a funny way of unfolding in our small, suburban corner of the world. I, Nancy, navigated the steady ebb and flow of life as a bank teller, while my husband, Tom, managed the intricate dance of municipal politics. Our home was a testament to Tom's family, a house passed down through generations, now echoing with the remnants of our conversations and debates. It was a typical Thursday evening, and I was rummaging through the kitchen, prepping for dinner. The aroma of cooking filled the air, a small comfort in the otherwise silent house. Tom, dinner's nearly ready, I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. He strolled into the kitchen, his face buried in the day's mail. Smells good. What's the occasion? His voice carried a hint of sarcasm, typical after a long day at the office. Just trying to keep things interesting, I replied, setting the table. You know, spice up our routine. Tom smirked, dropping the pile of envelopes on the counter. Routine is good, Nancy. Keeps things predictable. That was Tom, always preferring the predictable, the controlled, and the comfortable. I often wondered what ran through his mind as he sifted through city issues, what dreams he chased within the confines of his calculated world. As we sat down to eat, the conversation drifted to mundane things, the leaky faucet, the Jones' new car, and the upcoming city council meeting. It was all so painfully normal until the mention of my family. So, your nephew's coming this weekend? Tom asked, his fork pausing midair. Yeah, they are. Bobby's got a soccer game nearby. Thought they'd crash here afterward, I replied, trying to gauge his reaction. Tom's face hardened slightly. Great, more chaos. Just what we need. Oh, come on, Tom. They're just kids. Plus, it's nice having family around, don't you think? I chided, hoping to lighten his mood. Family's fine in small doses. But your brother's kids, they run around like wild animals. And that farm smell seems to follow them here. His words stung, an all too frequent reminder of the life I left behind and the world he never understood or cared to. They're just excited, Tom. And they're my family. They're part of me, I said firmly, my patience waning. Tom sighed, putting down his fork. I know. But can't they just tone it down a bit? I shook my head, frustration simmering beneath the surface. They're kids, Tom. They don't tone it down. That's what kids do, they play, they laugh, they make noise. The rest of the meal passed in a tense silence, the clinking of cutlery against plates filling the void between us. It was in these moments that I felt the distance growing, the gap widening between his world and mine. The morning buzzed with the usual flurry of activity, the kind that fills every working household. I was gulping down my coffee, already running through the day's tasks in my head, when my phone rang. It was an unusual time for a call, and seeing my brother's name flash on the screen sent a ripple of worry through me. Hey, Jake, what's up? I answered, trying to keep my voice even. Nancy, it's Dad. He's sick, real sick. Jake's voice was strained, each word heavy with concern. I felt the air leave the room, my hand tightening around the phone. What do you mean sick? What's happened? He's got cancer, Nancy. It's bad. The doctors are talking all sorts of treatments, but it's gonna cost a fortune. Jake's voice broke, the reality of our situation setting in. My mind raced, thoughts of Dad, the farm, and those childhood days flooding back. Okay. Let's figure this out. How much are we talking about? I can help. I could hear the hesitation in Jake's voice. It's a lot, Nancy. More than any of us got. They're talking about treatments, chemo, maybe more. It's all just a lot. My heart ached, an overwhelming urge to fix it all taking hold. I'll talk to Tom. We can use some savings, maybe get a loan. We'll find a way. With a heavy heart, I hung up and turned to find Tom standing in the doorway, a questioning look on his face. Everything okay? He asked, his voice laced with a casual concern. I took a deep breath, the weight of the news anchoring me to the spot. It's my dad. He's sick, really sick. Cancer. It's bad, Tom. Tom's expression shifted, the news landing with a thud. Jesus, Nancy. I'm sorry. What do you need? We need money for treatment. A lot of it. I want to help, Tom. I need to help, I said, the words tumbling out, a mix of desperation and determination. Tom ran a hand through his hair, the gears turning. Money, huh? That's gonna be tight. But, okay, we'll look at our finances, see what we can do. I nodded, the first wave of relief washing over me. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. The rest of the morning was a blur, calls to the hospital, more conversations with Jake, and a deep dive into our savings account. The numbers swirled before me, daunting yet necessary. This was family, and nothing was too big or too hard when it came to family. The day Dad arrived at our place was one I'd been dreading and longing for in equal measure. Tom had been oddly agreeable about Dad staying with us, which should have been my first clue that something was off. As soon as Dad's car pulled into the driveway, I rushed out, my heart aching at the sight of him. He was a shell of the robust man I remembered, his frame hunched, his face drawn with pain and weariness. Nancy, my girl, he said, his voice weak but filled with warmth as I helped him inside. Tom came out to greet us, his smile a little too stiff, a little too forced. Welcome, Mr. Williams. Let me show you to your room. The evening passed in a sort of anxious dance, Dad trying to appear stronger than he was, Tom playing the gracious host, and me, caught in the middle, worrying about everything unsaid. As we sat down to dinner, a heavy silence enveloped the table. Tom was the first to break it, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "So, Mr. Williams, I've been thinking about your situation. I want to help, really I do." Dad nodded, a wary look in his eyes. "That's kind of you, Tom. I appreciate all the support. But," Tom continued, "I think it's only fair we discuss some terms." "Terms?" My stomach twisted at the word, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "What do you mean, Tom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom looked between Dad and me, his gaze calculating. "Well, it's simple really. I'll cover the medical expenses, allow you to stay here, but in return I want the farm. All of it, transferred to me and Nancy." I stared at him, disbelief and anger churning inside me. "Are you serious right now?" "You can't be serious." Dad's expression hardened, his tired eyes suddenly alight with a spark of the old fire. "You want my land, my home, in exchange for helping me? It's a fair deal, don't you think?" Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "A small price to pay for your health and comfort." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my husband, the man I'd vowed to spend my life with, and he was bargaining over my father's life like it was a business transaction. "Tom, you can't do this. It's not right. It's disgusting," I spat out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Dad pushed his chair back, his body trembling with a mix of rage and effort. "I don't want your money, Tom. Not like this. I'd rather die than give you everything I've worked for." The room spun around me, the walls closing in. This was a nightmare, a terrible, heartless game, and Tom was revealing himself to be the villain. "Fine," Tom said, his voice cold. "Then you leave. Both of you. I won't be taken for a fool." With that, Dad grabbed his cane, his pride the only thing keeping him upright. I followed, my mind a whirlwind of hurt, anger, and disbelief. "Tom, I can't believe you. I won't let you do this to my family," I said, my voice trembling. But he didn't respond, his face set in a mask of indifference. We packed a few things, Dad's weak protests echoing in my ears. This was it. The facade had crumbled, and the man I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger with cold eyes and a colder heart. We didn't speak much on the drive to the small rental I'd managed to find on short notice. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over our heads, a place to regroup and figure out our next steps. Once inside, I helped Dad to the couch, his body sinking into the cushions with a weary sigh. "Nancy, I'm sorry. I never should have put you in this position," he murmured, his eyes downcast. "No, Dad. Don't you dare apologize. This is on Tom, not you." "I can't believe he'd do something like this," I replied, my voice fierce with anger. Dad shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "And to think I almost considered it, for a moment, to make sure you'd be taken care of. That's exactly why I'm doing all this, Dad. You took care of me my whole life. It's my turn now," I said, squeezing his hand. The following days were a blur of doctor's appointments, phone calls, and late-night internet searches for any financial aid we might qualify for. I was running on adrenaline and coffee, determined to find a way to afford Dad's treatment. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I came back to the rental to find Dad sitting at the small kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him. "Nancy, sit down. We need to talk about this. Realistically," he said, his voice steady but tired. I pulled up a chair, my stomach in knots. "What is it, Dad?" He pushed the bills toward me, his finger tapping on the total amount due. "This is more than you can handle, Nancy. I can't let you ruin your life for me." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Dad, I'm not having this conversation. I'll find a way. We'll find a way. Together." Dad reached across the table, his rough hand covering mine. "Nancy, listen to me. I've lived a good life. I've seen you grow into a remarkable woman. If it's my time, then so be it. But you have so much more to live for. Don't let this destroy you. I shook my head, pulling my hand away. No. I refuse to accept that. We're going to fight this, Dad. Until the very end. The determination in my voice seemed to give Dad a small spark of hope, or perhaps he just didn't have the heart to argue any further. We spent the rest of the evening in a quiet, mutual understanding, both of us too stubborn and too scared to consider giving up. Days turned into weeks, and despite the ever-present shadow of illness and financial strain, we found small moments of joy, old stories retold, laughter shared over simple meals, and quiet evenings watching whatever was on TV. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and for the moment, it was enough. 3 months had flown by in a blur of hospital visits, a relentless battle against the merciless tide of illness. Despite our best efforts and boundless hope, my father's condition deteriorated under the weight of the aggressive cancer. It was a losing fight, but one we endured together, with the stubbornness and heart that characterized our simple, hardworking family. My father's passing was quiet, a gentle surrender in the early hours of a gray morning. The pain of losing him was sharp, a raw wound that seemed to echo through the empty spaces of our rented home. The funeral was a somber affair, filled with hushed voices and tear-stained faces, a final goodbye to a man who had been the bedrock of our family. After the guests had left, the condolences spoken, and the last of the dishes put away, I sat with my brother, Jake, on the porch of our family home. The air was heavy with unspoken words, a shared grief hanging between us. "Emma, he was so proud of you. We both are. You did everything you could." I nodded, the weight of grief a tangible thing on my shoulders. "I just wish it could have been different." Jake hugged me, and we stood there, in the fading light, saying goodbye to our father, to a part of our lives that we'd never get back. The days after the funeral were heavy and quiet, filled with the kind of emptiness that follows a storm. I spent long hours staring at the land, our land, stretching out with rows of corn and the old oak tree standing tall against the skyline. It was more than just soil and crops, it was Dad's legacy, a testament to his life's work. Jake and I had been going through Dad's papers, trying to sort out his affairs, when I stumbled upon a series of letters and notes. They were inquiries and offers on the land, some dated back a few months, others more recent. Each one hinted at the value of the land, suggesting it was set to skyrocket with the city's expansion plans. "Jake, look at this," I called out, my hand trembling slightly as I held out the papers. He came over, his eyes scanning the documents quickly. "What the hell? These offers are huge, Nancy. And they're all pretty recent." I nodded, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. "It makes sense now. This is why Tom was so eager to get his hands on the land. He knew about this, somehow. He knew and tried to use Dad's illness to pressure us into signing it over." Jake's face darkened, a mix of anger and disbelief etched into his features. "That snake. Using our own dad's sickness for his gain. We've got to do something about this, Nancy." I agreed, the fire of determination igniting within me. "We will. We'll make sure this land stays in the family, just like Dad wanted. And as for Tom, he's going to regret ever trying to cheat us." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We met with lawyers, talked to the city planners, and started to piece together a plan. The land was indeed about to become very valuable, and we were determined to protect it, to ensure it benefited the family and honored Dad's memory. But as we dug deeper, the reality of the situation became clear. We were up against more than just greedy land speculators, we were dealing with a network of information and influence, and at the center of it all was Tom. One evening, as Jake and I sat exhausted from another day of meetings and calls, the phone rang. It was Tom, his voice smooth and eerily calm. "Nancy, we need to talk. I've been hearing things about the land. I think we can come to an agreement, something beneficial for both of us." I felt a surge of disgust listening to him, the man I had once loved, now nothing more than a conniving stranger. "There's nothing to talk about, Tom. You tried to cheat my family, to take advantage of my father's death. You're not getting a single inch of that land, I replied, my voice steely and resolute. Tom let out a dry laugh. Nancy, don't be naive. This is business. I was just trying to secure our future, our wealth. Let's meet, discuss this like adults. I clenched the phone tighter, the anger boiling inside me. The only business I'll be discussing with you is the divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, Tom. Goodbye. The days following my final conversation with Tom were fraught with a tense anticipation. Jake and I had enlisted a sharp-witted lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who specialized in estate and property law. He was a no-nonsense type, with a keen eye for detail and a deep understanding of the underhanded tactics used by those looking to exploit others. We sat in Mr. Henderson's office, the walls lined with legal tomes and certificates, as he laid out the strategy. Now, Nancy and Jake, I've seen this type of thing before. Wealthy individuals trying to cash in on insider information. It's illegal and immoral. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. I nodded, my resolve hardening. What do we need to do? I want to make sure Tom pays for what he tried to do. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, his eyes sharp. First, we gather all the evidence. The offers on the land, the communications from Tom, anything that can show his intent and knowledge of the land's value. Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. We've got plenty of that. Emails, letters, even some voicemails he left Nancy. Good, Mr. Henderson replied, that's a start. Next, we file for an injunction to prevent any sale or transfer of the land until this is resolved. That will protect your asset. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions, affidavits, and tense waiting. Tom, it seemed, was not going down without a fight. His own lawyers were pushing back, painting him as an innocent party, just trying to take care of his sick father-in-law. But we had the truth on our side, and slowly, the evidence began to pile up against him. The turning point came when one of Tom's associates, caught up in another investigation, decided to turn state's evidence, providing a direct link between Tom and the speculators looking to buy the land. The day we received the news, Jake and I met at the local diner, a spot we'd come to frequent for its strong coffee and quiet corners. Nancy, this is it. This guy's testimony is going to nail Tom. He's not getting out of this, Jake said, a hint of triumph in his voice. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness a match for my mood. Good. He deserves everything that's coming to him. I just wish it hadn't come to this, you know? Jake reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I know, sis. But you're doing the right thing. Protecting the land, our family. It's what Dad would have wanted. The trial was a spectacle, the media latching onto the story of a local official caught in a web of greed and deceit. Tom's face was plastered on every news outlet, the details of his scheming laid bare for all to see. And when the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, but sadness for the man I had once loved, now just a shadow of his former self. The courthouse steps were behind us, the weight of months of legal battles lifted. I took a deep breath, the air tasting fresher, sweeter somehow. Jake and I walked in silence, each lost in thought, until we reached the old diner that had become our haven. Sliding into the booth, the familiar clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation wrapped around us like a comforting blanket. Jake ordered us coffee, and we sat, the steam curling up between us. You know, Nancy, I think this is the first time I've seen you look relaxed in months, Jake said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I laughed, a genuine, light sound that felt foreign after all this time. Yeah, it's over, isn't it? I can finally move on, start fresh. He nodded, his eyes warm. You've got a whole new life ahead of you, sis. What's the plan? I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. Well, I've been thinking. I want to do something with the land. Not sell it off or anything, but maybe start a community garden, or a space for kids to learn about farming. Something that would make Dad proud. Jake's eyes lit up, enthusiasm radiating from him. That's a fantastic idea, Nancy. You always had a knack for dreaming big. I'm in, whatever you need. We spent the next hour talking excitedly about the possibilities, the dream taking shape between us. It felt good, right, to be planning for the future instead of reeling from the past. As we left the diner, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fight was over, but the journey was just beginning. I made my way to the small apartment I'd called home since leaving Tom. It was modest, but it was mine, a sanctuary from the world outside. Opening the door, I stepped inside, the quiet enveloping me. I wandered over to the window, the view stretching out to the city skyline in the distance. The land, our land, lay between here and there, a green expanse filled with potential and promise. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. I picked it up, a familiar voice on the other end. "Hey, Emma, it's Lucy, from the bank. I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say, if you need anything, we're all here for you." I smiled, touched by the offer. "Thanks, Lucy. I appreciate it. Actually, there might be something. I'm thinking of starting a project on the land, something community-focused. Maybe the bank could be a part of it?" Lucy's excitement was palpable, even through the phone. "Absolutely, Emma. That sounds amazing. Let's set up a meeting, talk about what you need. We'd love to be involved." Hanging up, I felt a surge of excitement. The project was more than just a dream now, it was a possibility, a real, tangible future. I sat down, a small notebook and pen in hand, and began to jot down ideas, plans, names. The page filled up quickly, a testament to the flurry of thoughts and hopes swirling through my mind. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for the community, for the legacy of the land. And as I wrote, I could almost feel Dad's presence, his quiet strength and unwavering support guiding me forward. The path ahead was uncharted, filled with challenges and opportunities, but I was ready. Ready to build, to grow, and to thrive. This was more than just a new chapter, it was a whole new book, and I was the author, pen in hand, ready to write a story of hope, perseverance, and renewal. The end was just the beginning.
Growing up, I always knew I was different from the rest of my family. My name's Jenny, and I come from a long line of restaurant owners. My dad, Joe, is a big, loud man who runs our family restaurant with an iron fist. Mom, Linda, is his perfect partner, always busy managing the staff. Then there's my older brother, Mike, the golden boy, groomed to take over the business. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, the air thick with the aroma of Dad's famous roast. Mom was going on about some new recipe they were trying out. "Jenny, you'll love this one. It's got that fancy herb you like." "What's it called again?" Mom asked, her eyes sparkling. "Thyme," I mumbled, picking at my food. Mike laughed from across the table, his mouth full. "Who cares about some dumb herb? Wait till you see the new grill Dad's getting for the restaurant. That's the real deal." Dad nodded, his eyes on me. "Speaking of the restaurant, Jenny, when are you gonna start taking an interest? You're not getting any younger, you know." I tried to make myself small in my chair. "I don't know, Dad. I like being outside, with the plants and stuff." Mom sighed, exchanging a look with Dad. "Plants? What are you gonna do with plants? You need a real job, Jenny. Something to fall back on." I remember feeling a knot in my stomach. It was the same conversation every time. No one in my family got it. No one except Grandma Rose. Grandma Rose lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen. She was different from my parents, gentle, patient, and she understood me in a way no one else did. I would often escape to her house, away from the endless talk of the restaurant. One day, I found her in the garden, her hands deep in the soil. "Jenny, dear, come help me plant these tulips," she said, her face bright with a smile. I sat down beside her, feeling the cool dirt on my hands. "Grandma, why don't Mom and Dad understand? I love this. I love being here with the plants. Grandma Rose wiped her brow and looked at me with those wise, old eyes. Your parents just want what's best for you, Jenny. But they don't see the world the same way we do. There's magic in these plants, in the earth. It's okay to be different. I clung to Grandma Rose's words, even as the pressure from my family grew. Mike would often taunt me, calling me the gardener in a tone that made it sound like an insult. Hey, gardener, you gonna plant some lettuce for tonight's salad? He'd jeer, his friends laughing behind him. I'd just roll my eyes and walk away. I knew they didn't get it. They didn't see the beauty in a single leaf, the peace in a morning dew. But I did. And in those moments, with my hands in the soil, I felt like I was where I belonged. High school graduation was like standing at a crossroads, and I, Jenny, was about to take the road less traveled by my family. The house was buzzing with excitement over Mike's plans to join Dad at the restaurant. Amidst it all, I felt like a spectator in my own life. One evening, we were all gathered in the living room. Dad was going on about expanding the restaurant, his eyes gleaming with ambition. Mike, you're going to be right at the heart of this, he said, clapping my brother on the back. Mike puffed up like a proud rooster. Yeah, I've got some ideas already, Dad. We're gonna make this place huge. I sat there, fiddling with a loose thread on the couch, feeling invisible. Mom turned to me, her voice sharp like she was waking me up from a daydream. And what about you, Jenny? Ready to step up? You can handle the front desk, learn the ropes. I took a deep breath. It was now or never. Actually, I'm not going to work at the restaurant. I'm going to study landscape design, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The room went silent. Dad's face turned red, like a tomato about to burst. Landscape what now? He barked. That's no career for you. You're a part of this family, and the restaurant is our legacy. Mike snickered. What are you gonna do? Plant flowers for a living? I felt my cheeks burning. Yes, actually. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm good at it, and I love it. Mom's face was a mix of confusion and worry. Jenny, be sensible. You can't make a living off playing in the dirt. I stood up, feeling a surge of defiance. It's not just playing in the dirt, Mom. It's creating something beautiful, something real. I'm not asking for your approval, but I am telling you, this is my decision. Dad slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming. If you choose this foolishness, you're on your own. Don't expect any help from us. I felt a knot in my stomach, but my voice was steady. Fine, I'll do it on my own. Grandma Rose, who had been quietly knitting in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but carried weight. Joe, let the girl follow her heart. She's got a gift, and it would be a sin to waste it, she said, her eyes fixed on Dad. Dad let out a frustrated grunt, turning away. Fine, do what you want. But don't come crying to us when it all falls apart. I turned to leave the room, my heart pounding. Mike called out after me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Good luck, gardener. Let's see how far those flowers get you. Stepping into college life felt like diving into deep water. It was thrilling, yet daunting. I, Jenny, was far from the familiar paths of my family's expectations, ready to carve my own way in the world of landscape design. I still remember the buzz of the first day in class, the room swirling with the energy of eager students. I found a spot in the back, trying to shrink into the shadows. That's when Zoe, a girl with fire engine red hair and eyes full of mischief, dropped into the seat next to me. Hey, there, newbie, I'm Zoe. First-timer in landscape design? I gave a shy nod. Yeah, I'm Jenny. It's all a bit overwhelming. Zoe's laugh was loud and genuine. You'll fit right in. Wait till you get your hands into the real dirt. It's epic. What dragged you into this world? I hesitated, the sting of my family's disapproval still fresh. I've always loved plants, the outdoors. It's where I feel right, you know? Her grin widened. Perfect place for you then. Classes were a whirlwind of learning and creating. I was absorbing things like a sponge, from the science of soils to the art of design. I was finally speaking a language I loved. After one particularly intense session, Mr. Davidson, our professor, a man as tall and sturdy as an oak, called me over. "Jenny, your designs, there's something else. You've got a real knack for this," he said, his voice serious but encouraging. I was stunned. Really? Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I'm just trying to do my best. He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. There's potential in you. Don't let it go to waste. Push harder. His words became my mantra. I started to live in the studio, my designs becoming more ambitious, more expressive. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. But even in those moments of joy, a part of me yearned for my family, despite everything. One quiet evening, I gathered the courage to call home. The phone rang, each tone heavy with anticipation. Finally, Mom's voice came through, sharp like a knife's edge. "What do you want, Jenny?" Her tone stung, but I pushed on. "I just wanted to check in, see how everyone is." She snorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Oh, now you care? After running off to play in the dirt, abandoning your own family." I clenched my teeth, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I didn't abandon anyone, Mom. I just chose a different path." Her laugh was bitter. "A dead-end path, you mean? Don't expect us to be here waiting when it all crumbles around you." The call ended soon after, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. But it also fueled a fire in me. I dove back into my work with a new intensity, determined to prove not just to my family, but to myself, that I was on the right path. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of a phone call during my final year of college. It was Aunt Clara, my mom's sister, her voice shaky and strained. "Jenny, it's about your Grandma Rose. She passed away last night," Aunt Clara said, her voice cracking with emotion. I felt the ground slip away beneath me. Grandma Rose had been my rock, the one person who believed in my dreams. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. The funeral was a somber affair. My family was there, all stiff and formal. Dad, Mom, and Mike looked like strangers to me. After the service, I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Clara. "I still can't believe she left that house to Jenny. What's she going to do with it? She can barely take care of herself," Mom said, her voice dripping with disapproval. I felt a surge of anger but bit my tongue. I didn't want a confrontation, not there, not then. The will reading was a few days later. Grandma Rose had left me her house, the beautiful garden haven where I had spent countless hours. My family was shocked, their whispers sharp as thorns. "Why would she leave it to Jenny? She's never around anyway," Mike muttered under his breath. Dad's face was like thunder. "This is ridiculous. That house could have been sold, put money into the restaurant." I stood up, my voice steady but firm. Grandma knew I loved that house, that garden. It was where we spent so much time together. I'm going to keep it, just as she wanted. Mom's response was cold and harsh. "So, you're just going to live there alone, playing in the dirt? What a waste." Their words stung, but I had made up my mind. I moved into Grandma's house, immersing myself in the garden she had loved so dearly. I started renovating the place, pouring my heart into every plant, every flower bed. As the months passed, I transformed Grandma's garden into something truly special. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself, away from the judgment and expectations of my family. The day the invitation to Mike's wedding arrived at my doorstep was a day of mixed feelings. It was a fancy piece of paper, golden letters against a white background, representing a part of my life I had left behind. Staring at it, I felt a storm of emotions churn inside me. I decided to go, but on my terms. I dressed in a way that felt true to me, elegant but simple, a far cry from the dirt-stained clothes they remembered. Entering the restaurant, the sights and sounds of my past life engulfed me. I spotted my family across the room. Mom, Dad, and Mike, all decked out, looking like a picture-perfect family. I braced myself and walked over. "Jenny? I didn't think you'd accept the invitation." Mom's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. "I came to see Mike get married." "It's a family event, isn't it?" I replied, trying to keep my voice level. Mike glanced at me, his smirk familiar and unwelcome. "What's the matter? Ran out of bushes to trim. Decided to play dress-up for a change?" I felt a familiar sting, but I brushed it off. "I'm just here to wish you well, Mike." It was then that his bride, a tall woman with a haughty look, chimed in. "Oh, this is the infamous Gardner sister? Did you manage to scrub the dirt from under your nails, dear, or is that your natural look?" Her words, sharp and mocking, hung in the air. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her see how deep they cut. "I clean up just fine, thanks for asking." "Congratulations to you both." Dad's eyes were cold, his voice colder. "Your being here doesn't erase the past, Jenny. You chose your path." Their words were like thorns, but I had grown a thick skin. "I'm not here to rehash old arguments. Just wanted to wish Mike a happy married life." I was quickly ushered to a small table in the corner, away from the family. Sitting there, I could feel the curious stares and hushed whispers. "That's the gardener," they whispered, "the black sheep of the family." But as I sat there, a sense of pride welled up in me. Yes, I was the gardener, the one who had dared to follow her own path. I was no longer the shy, unsure girl they remembered, but a woman who had found her strength, who had bloomed in spite of them. My discomfort only grew as the evening stretched on. Sipping my drink, I tried to make myself invisible, but that plan fell apart when I caught the eye of some guys I knew from childhood, Mike's friends, the same ones who used to join him in mocking me. "Look who's here, the family's little dirt digger," one of them, Jake, jeered as they approached, a sneer plastered on his face. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Actually, it's landscape designer. But I wouldn't expect you to understand the difference." Their laughter was harsh, grating. "Oh, listen to her, thinks she's all high and mighty now. Chris," another one, added with a scoff. I bit back a sharp retort, my hands clenching under the table. "I've worked hard for my success. My job is more than just playing in the dirt." Their amusement was cut short when an elderly man at the next table interjected. He'd been listening, his expression growing increasingly disapproving. "I've seen this young lady's work. The new park downtown, that's hers. It's outstanding. Shows what you know." The group was visibly taken aback, their smugness faltering. Muttering under their breath, they slunk away, their egos bruised. Emboldened, I decided to venture out from my safe corner, mingling through the crowd, dodging glances and whispers. That's when I overheard Mike, speaking to a group of his friends. "She's always been the odd one, more into her plants than real work," Mike said, his voice laced with a mix of amusement and disdain. His friend laughed loudly. "Every family's got its black sheep, huh?" Their words were like a slap, raw and stinging. I walked away, my heart pounding, reminding myself their opinions didn't define me. As I weaved through the crowd, I bumped into my cousin Lucy, a quiet presence in our loud family. "Hey, Jenny. I've seen some of your designs. They're really something," she said, her voice sincere. I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Lucy. It means a lot, especially today." Lucy looked at me, her eyes understanding. "I never agreed with how they treated you. You're doing amazing things. I'm glad you stuck to your path." Her words were a small comfort amidst the thorns of the evening. We chatted briefly, a momentary respite from the tension. As Lucy drifted away, I returned to my corner, feeling the weight of the evening. The loud music, the clinking glasses, and the bursts of laughter around me felt like they were happening in a different world. I sat there, sipping my drink, longing for the celebration to end. The wedding night was winding down, its fancy aura overshadowed by my own tangled feelings. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any more surreal, the mayor, a distant relative of Mike's bride, took the stage for his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to be here," he began, his voice booming across the room. "But tonight, I want to highlight a special guest among us, a true star in the world of landscape design, Jenny." Hearing my name, I almost choked on my drink. I stood up hesitantly, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. The mayor beamed at me. "Jenny here is the brilliant mind behind the transformation of our city park. She's a celebrated landscape designer who's won multiple awards for her incredible work. Let's give her the recognition she deserves." The room erupted into applause, a sound that felt foreign to me. I glanced at my family's table and saw them, their faces a mix of shock and embarrassment. Mike's bride leaned towards him, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Is he talking about your sister, the gardener?" Mike mumbled something, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him up. The mayor's praise continued. "Jenny's work has revitalized our city. She's a true talent." Amidst the clapping, I felt a surge of confidence. The mayor's words were like a light, dispelling the shadows of doubt and scorn from my family. Then, seizing the moment, I decided to speak up. "Thank you, Mayor, for your kind words. It's an honor to contribute to our city's beauty." I paused, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, settling on my family. "It's funny, isn't it? How life turns out. Mike, you and your bride are perfect for each other. Your shared talent for rudeness to others is quite remarkable." The room went silent, the air thick with tension. My parents, my brother, and his fiancée blushed deep red, their shame as visible as if I'd slapped them. Mom's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. "Jenny, what are you saying? This is your brother's wedding." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Just speaking the truth, Mom. Something our family seems to struggle with." Mike stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't come here and talk to us like that." I held my ground, my voice steady. "I've earned my right to speak, Mike. Maybe it's time you all listened." The confrontation ended with Mike sitting down, defeated, and the room slowly buzzing back to life. The mayor gave me a nod of respect before moving on. As I sat back down, the weight of the night lifted slightly. I had spoken my piece, stood up for myself in a way I never had before. I was no longer just the gardener or the outcast, I was Jenny, a recognized landscape designer, someone who had grown past her family's narrow expectations. After Mike's wedding, word got out about my success as a landscape designer. People were buzzing about the awards I'd won and the projects I'd aced. It felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the shadows. And then, my family came calling. One afternoon, while I was busy sketching out a new garden design, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice had a sweetness to it that felt out of place. "Jenny, darling, we've been hearing so much about your work. Your father and I are so proud of you," she cooed. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's a change of tune." There was a pause on the line. "Well, we were thinking, maybe you could come over. We'd love to see you, catch up on things." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Catch up, or catch onto my bank account?" I shot back. Mom's voice faltered. "Jenny, that's not fair. We're family." The word family hit a nerve. Family? Like when you all but disowned me for following my dreams. Seems like family matters when there's money in the picture. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I wasn't about to let them back into my life just because they smelled success. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Mike was standing there, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. "Hey, Jenny, can we talk?" he mumbled. I crossed my arms. "This should be good. What do you want, Mike?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know we haven't been great. But you're doing well, and I was wondering if you could, help me out a bit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help you out? After years of calling me the gardener and laughing at my ambitions. Mike's face reddened. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just that things are tough, and..." I cut him off. "Save it, Mike. I'm not your ATM. You and the family made it clear how you felt about me. You can't just waltz back into my life when it's convenient." He opened his mouth to argue, but I stopped him. "No, Mike. You made your bed. Now lie in it." After he left, I sat in my garden, surrounded by the beauty I had created. My phone rang a few more times over the next week, more attempts at reconciliation from my family, but I didn't answer. I was done with their fair-weather affection. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't need their validation or their greed. I was thriving in my own right, and that was all that mattered. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I looked around at the plants and flowers that were a testament to my hard work and passion, I realized I had everything I needed right here. I was happy, successful, and free from the toxic ties that had once bound me. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a whole new book. My book. And I was going to make sure it was a bestseller, written on my own terms, in my own style. The new growth in my life was just starting, and I was ready for whatever came next. My name is Clara, a 32-year-old woman who once believed in fairy tale endings. 3 years ago, my life took an unexpected turn when I met Mark, the man who would become my husband. This is our story, a journey of love, trust, and eventual betrayal, set against the backdrop of a seemingly perfect marriage. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when fate led me to the corner cafe. With a John Grisham novel in hand, I was lost in the world of legal thrillers. That's when Mark entered, his presence immediately noticeable. He had an air of confidence, yet there was a warmth in his smile that felt inviting. "Hey, is that Grisham's latest?" he asked, nodding towards my book. His voice was friendly, tinged with genuine curiosity. "Yeah, just started it." "He's always a good read," I responded, pleasantly surprised by the ease of our conversation. We delved into a discussion about our favorite authors, our conversation flowing effortlessly. Mark had a way of making me laugh, his humor both witty and endearing. As hours passed, it felt like we were old friends catching up, rather than two strangers who had just met. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I grew closer. Our shared interests in music, particularly old jazz, and a mutual love for exploring hidden bookstores around the city, cemented our bond. He was charming, respectful, and attentive. I found myself eagerly anticipating our dates, each encounter leaving me more enchanted. One evening, as we walked along the river, Mark's tone turned serious. "Clara, I've never felt this way before. I think I'm falling for you," he confessed under the dim glow of the streetlights. His words sent a rush of warmth through me. "I feel the same, Mark." "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," I admitted, my heart racing with excitement and a hint of fear. 6 months flew by, and our relationship only grew stronger. It was during a cozy dinner at my apartment when Mark proposed. The moment was simple, yet profoundly sincere. There was no hesitation in my yes. I loved him, and I believed in our future together. The joy of our engagement, however, was soon met with apprehension as the time came to meet Mark's parents. His mother, Linda, was a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to judge my every move. His father was more amiable, but there was an undeniable seriousness to him, especially regarding the institution of marriage. During a formal dinner at their house, Mark's father brought up the subject of a prenuptial agreement. It's just practical, he stated matter-of-factly. The request caught me off guard, but given my past experience with a cheating ex-boyfriend, I understood the necessity. I agree, but I have a condition, I said, steadying my voice. If either of us cheats, the cheater owes the other $100,000. Mark's expression was a mix of surprise and respect. I promise, Clara, I'd never cheat on you, he said earnestly. I wanted to believe him, to trust that this time my heart was safe. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, dancing, and promises of forever. The first year of our marriage felt like living in a dream. We traveled to romantic destinations, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and supported each other's ambitions. Mark was not just my husband, he was my best friend, my confidant. After the whirlwind of our wedding, Mark and I settled into married life with an ease that surprised even me. Our first year was like living in a bubble of happiness, untouched by the outside world. Our honeymoon in Paris was a dream. Strolling along the Seine, we were just two lovebirds lost in a city of love. Can you believe we're here? I asked Mark one evening, as we watched the Eiffel Tower light up. He pulled me close and said, with you, I can believe anything. This is just the start for us, Clara. Those days were filled with laughter, romantic dinners, and promises of a future together. We returned home with a suitcase full of memories and a bond that felt unbreakable. Back home, our days found a comfortable routine. Mark would kiss me goodbye every morning before heading to work, and I'd be waiting with dinner when he got back. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversations stretching late into the night. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Mark said, you know, I never thought I'd be this happy just doing mundane stuff like washing dishes. I playfully splashed some water at him. That's because you've got an amazing wife. It's all about good company. He laughed, catching the water in his hands. Absolutely. Best decision of my life, marrying you. Despite our happiness, there was a growing pressure from outside, the expectation of starting a family. At family gatherings, Mark's mom, Linda, would often drop not-so-subtle hints. So, when are we going to hear some good news? Linda asked one Sunday lunch, her tone laced with expectation. I tried to brush it off with a joke. Oh, you'll be the first to know when there's news. But her persistence grew over time, and it started to strain me. Mark noticed my discomfort but reassured me, don't let my mom get to you. We'll start a family when we're ready, not a minute sooner. Despite these pressures, our first year of marriage was magical. We celebrated our first anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. Mark surprised me with a necklace I had admired months ago. Happy anniversary, Clara. Here's to many more years of happiness, he said, his eyes shining with love. I felt tears prick my eyes as I said, thank you, Mark. I couldn't have asked for a better partner in life. That night, as we cuddled on the couch, I couldn't help but feel incredibly lucky. I had a husband who loved me, a cozy home, and a future that seemed bright. As our second year of marriage began, the pressure from Mark's family, especially his mother Linda, started to take a toll on me. It wasn't just about starting a family anymore, her criticisms seeped into every aspect of our lives. Linda had a way of making her disapproval known, often under the guise of helpful comments. Every visit became a nightmare for me. One afternoon, as I was setting the table for lunch, she walked into the kitchen and eyed the spread with a disapproving frown. Is this what you're serving? A bit simple, don't you think? Linda remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. I thought we'd enjoy something light today. She just sniffed, muttering under her breath about proper meals and good housekeeping. Her comments weren't just confined to my cooking. She found fault in everything I did, from the way I decorated the house to how I spent my free time. Nothing was off limits. One evening, while Mark and I were relaxing in the living room, Linda decided to give her unsolicited opinion. You know, Clara, if Mark gave me the money he spends on you, I could hire a proper cleaner and a cook. Mark looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. His silence felt like a betrayal. I was seething but managed to say, "Well, Linda, I'm doing my best here." What hurt the most was how Mark's attitude started to change. He began echoing his mother's criticisms, albeit in a more subtle way. After one of Linda's visits, Mark casually mentioned, "Mom might have a point about the house. Maybe we should consider getting some help." I felt a pang of hurt and frustration. "So, you think I can't handle it either?" "No, that's not what I meant," he backpedaled, but the damage was done. The constant criticisms and Mark's growing detachment were straining our marriage. We started having arguments over trivial things, our once easy conversations turning into tense exchanges. After a particularly heated argument, I found myself wondering aloud, "What happened to us, Mark? We used to be on the same team." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I don't know, Clara. It's just everything feels so complicated now." I went to bed that night feeling lonely and misunderstood. Linda's insidious comments had not only invaded my home but were also creeping into my marriage, leaving me to wonder if the love Mark and I shared was strong enough to withstand this constant barrage of negativity. As the third year of our marriage rolled in, a sense of unease began to settle in my heart. The once bright flame of our love seemed to flicker under the shadow of doubt and mistrust. It started with a phone call, or rather, several of them. A name kept popping up on Mark's phone, Jake. I couldn't help but notice how Mark's demeanor changed whenever that name flashed on the screen. One evening, while we were watching TV, his phone rang again. "Jake," the screen flashed. Mark quickly silenced it and put the phone away, but not before I saw the nervous glance he threw my way. "Who's Jake?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding. "Oh, just a new guy at work. No one important," Mark replied, but his voice was too nonchalant, his answer too rehearsed. Mark's behavior began to change. He started coming home late from work, his excuses flimsy and inconsistent. His wardrobe underwent a transformation too, from casual to sharply tailored suits. "Working late again?" I questioned one night as he prepared to leave, noticing his dressed-up appearance. "Yeah, a big project," he said without meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." One day, my frustration boiled over. As Mark was about to leave for another late night at work, I confronted him. "This isn't like you, Mark. What's really going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Mark sighed, his expression a mix of guilt and annoyance. "I told you, it's just work. Why can't you trust me?" "Because you're hiding something. You're never here, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away," I shot back, my eyes stinging with tears. Mark didn't respond. He just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. That night, lying in our empty bed, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. The next morning, I called a private detective. It felt like a betrayal, but the constant worry and uncertainty were eating me alive. I needed answers, and I was determined to get them, no matter what they revealed about the man I thought I knew. The days after contacting the private detective were a haze of anxiety and anticipation. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while my world was quietly crumbling around me. Then the call came, and with it, the shattering of my last hopes. "Mrs. Johnson, we have conclusive evidence." "I'm afraid your suspicions were correct." The detective's voice was solemn, heavy with the weight of the news he was delivering. He explained that Mark had been having an affair. The mysterious Jake on his phone was actually a woman. My heart sank as he detailed their meetings, providing timestamps and photos. It was irrefutable. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of devastation and vindication. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore, they were cold, hard facts. Despite the pain, I decided not to confront Mark immediately. I needed more than just the evidence of his infidelity, I needed to understand the full extent of his deceit. One evening, as I was passing by his home office, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Mark was talking to his mother, Linda. "Mom, I'm planning to end it with Clara after your birthday." Mark's voice was cold, devoid of any affection he once had for me. "Oh, that's wise, dear. Make sure she gets me a nice 65th birthday present before you drop the bomb," Linda replied, her voice laced with a callousness that took my breath away. I leaned against the wall, feeling nauseous. Not only was my husband unfaithful, but he and his mother were plotting against me, waiting to use me for one last expensive gift before discarding me. Fueled by a mixture of anger and resolve, I decided to play along. I continued as if nothing was wrong while secretly gathering more evidence of Mark's infidelity. The detective provided me with everything: photos, videos, and even audio recordings. I was building my case, preparing for the moment I would strike back. As I lay in bed each night, next to the man who had betrayed me, a plan began to form in my mind. I would wait until after Linda's birthday. I would give them the illusion of victory, let them think they had outsmarted me. But when they least expected it, I would reveal everything and turn the tables. As Linda's 65th birthday approached, I put on a mask of ignorance, acting as though everything was normal. Inside, I was a cauldron of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a fierce determination to see my plan through. A few days before the birthday, Linda casually mentioned her upcoming celebration during a family dinner. "So, Clara, I'm expecting a grand 65th birthday. You must have planned something special for me," she said with a sly smile, clearly anticipating a lavish gift. Keeping my emotions in check, I replied with feigned enthusiasm, "Of course, Linda. I've arranged a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant. It'll be a night to remember." Her eyes lit up with glee, not realizing the trap I was setting. "Oh, how wonderful. I can't wait. Just a small family gathering, right?" "Yes, very intimate and exclusive, just for close family," I confirmed, my words laced with hidden irony. Later that night, Mark approached me, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "That's quite a generous plan for Mom's birthday. Are you sure about this?" I looked at him, maintaining my composure. "Absolutely. It's a significant birthday, and I want to do something special for her." Mark seemed appeased, but I could tell he was puzzled by my willingness to indulge his mother. As the day of the dinner drew near, I took care of the final arrangements. I confirmed the booking in Linda's name, rechecked the guest list, and made sure everything was set for the grand evening. I was playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, but underneath the facade, I was ready to expose the betrayal and deceit that had been festering in our marriage. The night before the dinner, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. I was hours away from turning the tables on Mark and Linda. They thought they were using me for one last benefit before discarding me. Little did they know, I was the one controlling the game now. The evening of Linda's 65th birthday was set in a luxurious restaurant, every detail meticulously planned to reflect the grandeur of the occasion. As Linda reveled in the opulence, I played the part of the gracious daughter-in-law, masking my inner turmoil with a practiced smile. As the dinner drew to a close, the waiter presented the bill is for $4,500. I reached for my card with a steady hand, my heart pounding in my chest. After swiping the card, I glanced around the table, seeing Linda's satisfied smirk and Mark's uneasy expression. "Thank you for such a wonderful evening, Clara." "This is truly generous," Linda cooed, her voice dripping with insincerity. It was then that Mark leaned in, his voice laced with mockery. "By the way, Clara, I want a divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let them see my pain. Linda, seizing the moment, chimed in sharply, "Well, then, I guess you should leave. This is a family gathering, after all." Without a word, I stood up and left the restaurant, my dignity intact despite the turmoil inside. As I walked away, I pulled out my phone and swiftly canceled the payment. Then, with a few more taps, I blocked the shared account, ensuring Mark couldn't cover the cost either. Back at home, I packed my belongings quickly, the finality of my actions setting in. I was leaving this chapter of my life behind, stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. Soon, my phone erupted with calls. I answered, and Linda's voice, shrill with rage and panic, filled my ears. The payment didn't go through. The restaurant staff called the police. What have you done? Her words were a cacophony of anger and disbelief, but I remained silent, letting her tirade wash over me. This was their doing, their betrayal and manipulation coming back to haunt them. After hanging up, I looked around the empty house, a place once filled with dreams and love now just a hollow shell. I took a deep breath, stepped out the door, and didn't look back. Their calls continued, a desperate plea for help that I no longer felt obliged to answer. I had made my move, exposed their deceit, and now it was time for me to rebuild, away from the lies and the pain that had defined my life for far too long. After leaving my marital home, I spent a restless night at a friend's place, my mind racing with what needed to be done next. The morning sun brought with it a sense of clarity and determination. It was time for the final confrontation. I arrived at the house to find Mark and Linda waiting, their faces a mix of anger and confusion. Clutching the divorce papers and the evidence of Mark's infidelity, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Linda was the first to break the silence, her voice dripping with scorn. So, you've come crawling back? After embarrassing us like that? I met her gaze, unflinching. I'm not here to crawl. I'm here for a divorce. Mark, who announced our divorce a day ago, suddenly tried to win everything back. Clara, can't we talk about this? It was a mistake. I cut him off, holding up the evidence. Save it, Mark. Your mistake was ongoing and well documented. Linda scoffed, trying to regain control. You think you can just walk away and leave us with nothing? You're nothing without us. I laid the divorce papers on the table. Actually, it's you who will be leaving me with something. According to our prenup, Mark owes me $100,000 for his infidelity. Mark's face went pale, and Linda's eyes widened in shock. As they scrambled to respond, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was it, the end of the lies, the deceit, and the pain. You can try to fight this, but the evidence is clear. I suggest you pay up and move on, I said, my voice steady. Mark looked defeated, and Linda was speechless, her usual bravado gone. With no further words, I turned and walked out of the house, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like freedom. The calls and pleas that followed fell on deaf ears. I had closed that chapter of my life for good. In the end, they paid. Mark had to borrow from his parents, but I didn't care where the money came from. It was a small compensation for the betrayal, but more importantly, it was closure. As I sat in the lawyer's office, signing the last of the papers, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been painful, full of betrayal and heartache, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I walked out into the sunlight, a free woman, ready to start anew. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. After all the darkness, I finally felt like I was stepping into the light.
I never thought I'd be here, sitting in the living room of what used to be our house, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My name is Emily, and just a few months ago, I was living what I thought was a happy life with my husband, Mark. We were the couple everyone envied, or so I believed. Mark, once a charming and attentive man, had become someone I hardly recognized. His once warm eyes now seemed cold and distant. It all changed after my dad passed away. Dad was my rock, and losing him felt like losing a part of myself. But for Mark, it seemed like an opportunity. The evening air was heavy as I sat across from Mark, the silence between us a stark contrast to the laughter and love that once filled this room. Are you even listening to me, Emily? Mark's voice, sharp and impatient, broke the silence. I looked up, meeting his gaze. Yes, I'm listening, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. It's simple. I want a divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. This house, it's mine. You need to start looking for somewhere else to live." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had sensed the growing distance between us, but divorce? I was speechless. "You can't be serious, Mark. After all these years, you're just going to throw everything away?" I finally managed to say, my voice tinged with disbelief. Mark leaned back in his chair, a cold, unfazed look on his face. "It's not just throwing away, Emily. It's moving on. I've been feeling trapped in this marriage, and now, with your dad gone, I see no reason to continue this charade." I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. How could he be so cruel, so heartless? My father was gone, and now Mark, the man I had loved and trusted, was abandoning me too. "I don't understand you, Mark. You used to be so different, so caring. What happened to us?" Mark let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, please. Spare me the drama, Emily. You should start packing. The sooner you're out, the better." I sat there, stunned and hurt, trying to process everything. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the shattering of an illusion. The illusion of a happy life that I had clung to for so long. And now, I was alone, with nothing but memories of a love that turned out to be nothing but a facade. My life, already hanging by a thread, spiraled further into chaos with the arrival of Mrs. Harwood, Mark's mother. She moved in unannounced, bringing with her an air of hostility that choked the already tense atmosphere of the house. "Emily, I expect you to behave appropriately while I'm here," Mrs. Harwood declared, her voice sharp as she settled into the living room, making it clear that she considered herself in charge. I tried to reason with her. "Mrs. Harwood, I understand this is a difficult time for everyone, but I assure you, I have no intention of causing trouble." She fixed me with a cold stare. "Trouble seems to follow you, dear. I've seen how you and Mark have been living. It's no wonder my son wants a divorce." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her walk over me. "Mark and I are adults. We'll handle our matters ourselves. Your interference isn't needed." She scoffed. "Interference? I'm protecting my son from your manipulative ways. You've done enough damage already." The days that followed were a blur of constant snide remarks and belittling comments from Mrs. Harwood. She criticized everything from the way I dressed to the way I cooked. It felt like she was trying to erase my presence from the house. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, she came into the kitchen. "You're using too much salt. Don't you know anything about cooking?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "I've been cooking for myself and Mark for years. He's never complained." "Well, he's too kind to say anything, but I'm not. You're ruining his health with your terrible cooking." I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. "Mrs. Harwood, I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." She leaned against the counter, watching me like a hawk. "You can manage, can you? We'll see how long that lasts." Every interaction with her was an exercise in restraint. She had an opinion on everything and wasn't afraid to voice it, loudly and often. It was like she was trying to provoke me, to push me to my breaking point. Mark, for his part, did nothing to ease the tension. He avoided being in the same room with us, leaving me to fend for myself against his mother's relentless attacks. It was clear he had no intention of standing up for me, not anymore. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table, Mrs. Harwood sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know, Emily, it's not too late to leave gracefully. You could save yourself a lot of trouble." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I have as much right to be here as you do, Mrs. Harwood. I'm not leaving until the divorce is finalized." She smirked. "Stubborn, aren't you? Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Mark doesn't want you here, and neither do I. You're just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave." Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the unwelcome and precarious position I found myself in. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to stand my ground, no matter how difficult Mrs. Harwood made it. The house had become a battleground, and I was determined not to be the one who surrendered. Living with Mrs. Harwood under the same roof was like walking on eggshells. But the day she crossed the line was when she targeted my cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was more than just a pet. He was a part of my world, a comfort in my loneliest times. I came home to find Mrs. Harwood standing in the hallway, a look of disgust on her face as she glared at Whiskers. "That filthy animal," she spat. I want it out of my son's house. It's either the cat or you, Emily. I felt a surge of anger. Whiskers isn't going anywhere. He's part of this family. She sneered. That thing is a nuisance. I won't have it shedding and spreading germs all over. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He's a harmless cat, Mrs. Harwood. You're being unreasonable. She moved closer, her voice cold and harsh. Listen here, Emily. I call the shots now. Either that cat goes, or things will get very unpleasant for you. I knew arguing with her was futile. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I had to think fast. That's when I remembered my friend Sarah, an animal lover who had always adored Whiskers. I called Sarah, my voice shaky. Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you look after Whiskers for a while? I'm in a bit of a situation here. Sarah was quick to respond. Of course, Emily. What's going on? Are you okay? I sighed. It's a long story. I'll explain later. But thank you. You're a lifesaver. Packing Whiskers' things felt like a defeat, but I knew it was for the best. As I was about to leave with Whiskers, Mrs. Harwood blocked my path. Finally, some sense, she said, a smug smile on her face. I knew you'd do the right thing. I held back my anger. This isn't over, Mrs. Harwood. I'm doing this for Whiskers, not for you. She laughed. Oh, keep telling yourself that, dear, but we both know who's in charge here. One day, I found my clothes ruined. My favorite dress, my comfy sweaters, everything was bleached. It was no accident. I stormed into the living room where Mrs. Harwood was reading a magazine, looking too innocent. Did you do this? I held up the ruined dress, my voice shaking with anger. She looked up, feigning surprise. Oh dear, what happened to your dress? Don't play dumb, Mrs. Harwood. You put bleach in the wash, I accused. She shrugged, a smirk creeping onto her face. Oh, that. I was cleaning the machine. Must have forgotten to rinse it out. Accidents happen, dear. I was fuming. This wasn't an accident. You did this on purpose. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Prove it, Emily. It's my word against yours, and we both know who my son will believe. I felt helpless and defeated. She was right. Mark would never take my side over his mother's. Later that day, I confronted Mark. Your mother ruined my clothes. You need to talk to her. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. Mom said it was an accident. Stop making a big deal out of everything. I couldn't believe his indifference. She's doing this on purpose, Mark. Can't you see what she's doing? He sighed, annoyed. Look, Emily, I don't want to get involved. Just stay out of her way. Stay out of her way? This was supposed to be my home, too. I realized then that I was alone in this. Mark wouldn't help me. His mother was out to get me, and I had to fend for myself. The destruction of my clothes was just the beginning of Mrs. Harwood's campaign against me. Each day brought a new challenge, a new way for her to assert her dominance and make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I started to notice little things missing or out of place. My favorite mug cracked, my pictures taken down from the walls, small but personal attacks. It was a psychological game, and she was playing to win. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. My books were scattered on the floor, pages torn. I confronted Mrs. Harwood, who was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. Did you do this? I asked, holding up a torn book. She glanced at it, then back at me, with a cold, indifferent expression. Oh, those old things? I thought they were trash. You should be more careful about what you leave around. I was outraged. These are my books, Mrs. Harwood. You have no right to touch them. She shrugged, unfazed. This is my son's house. I'll do as I please. Maybe you should start packing your trash. I felt a burning anger, but also a sense of helplessness. Arguing with her was pointless. She had made it clear that she didn't respect me or my belongings. The next morning, I found my toiletries thrown in the trash. My shampoo, my face cream, everything gone. I dug them out, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just petty sabotage. It was a declaration of war. I confronted Mark again. Your mother threw away my toiletries. This has to stop. He barely glanced at me. Maybe it was a mistake. Just buy new ones. A mistake? She's doing this deliberately, Mark. Can't you see that?" I was near tears, frustrated by his continued indifference. He stood up, his voice cold. "I'm not getting into this, Emily. Sort it out with her." Sort it out with her? How was I supposed to sort out deliberate cruelty? I tried to keep to myself, to avoid Mrs. Harwood, but she seemed to take my avoidance as a challenge. She'd make loud, snide comments about me on the phone, ensuring I could hear every word. She'd accidentally spill things on the floor I'd just cleaned, watch me as I cleaned up, a satisfied smirk on her face. One afternoon, I found my laptop screen cracked. It was the last straw. I stormed into the kitchen, where Mrs. Harwood was humming to herself. "What did you do to my laptop?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She turned, feigning ignorance. "Oh, did something happen to your laptop? That's unfortunate." "You did this, didn't you? You're trying to make my life hell." She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "You brought this on yourself, Emily. You're not wanted here. The sooner you realize that, the better." Just when I thought things couldn't get worse with Mrs. Harwood, she struck where it hurt the most. My father's pictures, the last memories I had of him, were gone. I had put them up in the living room, a small comfort in these trying times. But now, the walls were bare, as if he had never been a part of my life. I found Mrs. Harwood in the kitchen, smirking over a cup of coffee. "Where are my father's pictures?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, feigning confusion. "Pictures? Oh, those old things. We needed more space. This isn't a shrine, Emily." I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling. "Those were my father's pictures. You had no right to take them down." She shrugged, her voice cold and dismissive. "They were depressing, always staring at us. It's time to move on, Emily. He's gone, and clinging to the past won't change that." I couldn't believe her cruelty. "You can't just erase him from my life. Those pictures were all I had left of him." She stood up, towering over me. "Your father has nothing to do with this house. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Just like your marriage, it's in the past now." I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to show how much she had hurt me. But I knew that's what she wanted. So, I held back, biting my tongue. "You're heartless," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I'm practical, Emily. It's a trait you clearly lack. You should learn to let go." I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with loss and anger. Mrs. Harwood had taken the last piece of my father from me, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the empty spaces on the walls echoing in my mind. Mrs. Harwood's words kept replaying in my head. Let go. Move on. But how could I? Those pictures were more than just images. They were a connection to my father, a reminder of his love and presence in my life. I knew then that this was more than just a battle over living space. It was a fight for my memories, my past, and my identity. Mrs. Harwood had declared war on the most personal parts of my life, and I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my father's memory and my right to mourn him. It was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a call from a notary changed everything. I was sitting in my room, trying to muster the strength to face another day with Mrs. Harwood when my phone rang. "Mrs. Emily Harwood? This is John Carter, the notary handling your father's will. We need you to come in to discuss some important matters," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. "My father's will? I wasn't aware he had left anything." "Yes, he did. It's quite urgent. Can you come in today?" Mr. Carter's tone was serious. I agreed, curiosity and a glimmer of hope stirring within me. Maybe this was the break I needed. At the notary's office, Mr. Carter handed me a folder. "Your father left you a significant amount of money, Miss Emily, enough to start a new life." I was speechless. My father, always the quiet supporter, had given me a lifeline. "And there's something else," Mr. Carter continued, handing me another set of documents. "Your father left these for you. He said they were important." I opened the documents, but Mr. Carter stopped me. "Perhaps you should look at these in private. They're quite personal. I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as I left the office. Back home, I locked myself in my room and began to read. The documents were records of financial transactions between my father and Mark. My father had lent Mark a significant amount of money, over $200,000. I couldn't believe it. All this time, Mark had been in debt to my father. Was this why he was so eager to divorce me after my father's death? Did he think the debt died with him? I felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. My father had given me more than just money. He had given me the power to fight back. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to make Mark pay for his deceit and Mrs. Harwood for her cruelty. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to set the rules. Armed with the truth about Mark's debt to my father, I felt a newfound sense of power. The day of the divorce signing, I was ready to turn the tables. As we sat in the lawyer's office, Mark and his mother smirking confidently, I waited for the right moment. Just as Mark was about to sign, I spoke up. "Before we finalize this, there's something you should know, Mark," I said, sliding the loan documents across the table. He glanced at them, his smirk fading fast. "What's this?" I leaned back, feeling in control for the first time in months. "That's the debt you owe my father, over $200,000, and now it's owed to me." Mrs. Harwood's eyes widened in shock. "What debt? Mark, what is she talking about?" Mark's face was a mask of panic. "It's nothing, Mom. Just some old business between Emily's dad and me." I laughed. "So, you thought you'd get away with not repaying him? That's why you were so eager to get rid of me?" Mark didn't meet my eyes. "It's complicated, Emily. I was in trouble, and your dad offered to help." I shook my head, disgusted. "You were going to leave me with nothing while sitting on a debt you owed my father. You're despicable." He tried to touch me, but I backed away. "You've been hiding this. You owe me that money, and I intend to collect." The lawyer, a middle-aged man who had been silent till now, interjected. "If these documents are legitimate, Mr. Mark, you're legally obligated to repay this debt." Mrs. Harwood turned to her son, her voice rising. "You borrowed money from her father, and now we have to pay her?" Mark tried to speak, but I was faster. Yes, he did, and he thought he could escape it by divorcing me quickly after my father's death. The room was tense, the air thick with the revelation. Mrs. Harwood looked from the documents to Mark, her expression one of betrayal and anger. "You've been lying to us all along," she hissed at Mark. "You put us in this mess." Mark's usual confident demeanor had crumbled. He looked defeated, cornered. I had no choice. I was in trouble, and Emily's dad offered to help." I stood up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "Well, now you can repay that help. Every single dollar. You thought you could outsmart me, but you were wrong." Mrs. Harwood was fuming. "We'll fight this. We won't let you take everything from us." But I knew I had the upper hand. "You can try, but the law is on my side. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to repay the debt." As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of triumph. For so long, I had been under Mark and his mother's control, their whims and cruelty dictating my life. But now, the tables had turned. I had them right where I wanted, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. This was my chance to get back what I was owed, and I was going to take it. The day Mark and Mrs. Harwood sold the house to repay the debt was the day I finally felt free. As they packed their last boxes, I couldn't help but savor the moment. "You brought this on yourself, Mark," I said, watching him struggle with a heavy box. "You could have been honest with me." He avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped. "I know. I'm sorry, Emily." Mrs. Harwood, looking older and more defeated than ever, chimed in. "This is all your fault. You've ruined everything." I shook my head, no longer affected by her words. "No, Mrs. Harwood, you two did this to yourselves. I'm just claiming what's rightfully mine." They left without another word, and I watched as their car disappeared down the road. It was the end of an era, one filled with pain and betrayal, but also growth and resilience. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. It was time to start anew. With the money from my father and the repaid debt, I bought a small, cozy house just for me and Whiskers, who I had brought back home. Sitting in my new living room, Whiskers purring on my lap, I called Sarah, my friend who had helped me through the darkest times. "Hey Sarah, it's done. I'm finally free," I said, a smile spreading across my face. Sarah's voice was warm and excited. "That's amazing, Emily. I'm so proud of you. You've come so far." I looked around my new home, a sense of peace settling over me. "I have, and it's all thanks to people like you who stood by me." "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Emily. What's next for you?" Sarah asked. I thought for a moment. A fresh start, building a life that's truly mine, and maybe helping others who've been through what I have. As I hung up, I realized that this was more than just a new house. It was a new chapter, one where I was in control, free from the shadows of the past. I had not only survived, I had come out stronger. I stood up, Whiskers following me as I walked to the window, looking out at my small garden. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and to find joy in the simple things. I had lost much, but I had gained even more, a sense of self, strength, and the courage to move forward. This was my story, my journey, and it was just beginning. My name is Rachel, and this is my story. Growing up, my life was all about church, family, and the simple truths my parents held dear. My dad, Thomas, was a deacon, and my mom, Mary, led the women's group. I always tried to be the good daughter they wanted. I wore modest dresses, sang in the choir, and never missed a Sunday service. But life at home wasn't just prayers and Bible study. It was also filled with the constant tug-of-war between my parents and my older brother, David. David was different. He had this fire in him, a passion for music that didn't fit into our parents' world. I remember him as a kid, always tapping rhythms on the kitchen table, eyes alive with dreams bigger than our small town. Then came his teenage years, and with it, the electric guitar. He was a natural, and soon, he formed a band. They called themselves Rebels Echo. It was like a declaration of his new life, away from the expectations of our parents. Our parents didn't understand. They saw his music as a path away from faith. "He's lost," they'd say with a sigh. I'd sit there, listening, feeling torn between loyalty to my family and the love for my brother. Despite their disapproval, David and I stayed close. We'd talk on the phone late at night, him sharing stories of his gigs, me whispering about life at home. He was my window to a world beyond our small town, a world I yearned to explore, but never dared to. Then came Michael, my husband, or as I thought back then, the love of my life. He was older, a friend of a friend from church. Michael was everything my parents admired, kind, successful, and deeply religious. We dated briefly, and before I knew it, there was a ring on my finger and a promise of forever. Our wedding was beautiful, but bittersweet. David wasn't there. Mom and Dad insisted, and I, as always, didn't argue. Michael held my hand, his smile warm, but my heart ached for my brother. As we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but feel a part of my world was missing. After the wedding, we moved into Michael's house. It was a cozy place, filled with the promise of a happy future. But as I unpacked my things, I couldn't shake off the feeling of something missing. I remember Michael noticing my distant look. "Everything okay, Rachel?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Yeah, just thinking about David," I replied, forcing a smile. "He's made his choices, Rachel. We need to focus on our life, our future," he said, a hint of firmness in his voice. I nodded, knowing he was right. But deep down, I couldn't let go of the bond I shared with my brother, no matter how far our paths had diverged. The first few months of marriage felt like a dream. Michael was attentive and caring, always making sure I was happy. Our days were filled with shared laughter and long talks into the night. He'd often surprise me with small gifts or a bouquet of flowers, just because. "Morning, beautiful." He'd greet me every day with a kiss, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Good morning," I'd reply, my heart fluttering with happiness. We'd spend weekends exploring nearby towns, trying out little diners, and walking hand in hand by the riverside. Everything felt perfect, like a life I had only imagined in my dreams. But as time passed, I began to feel a bit restless. I loved being with Michael, but there was a part of me that wanted more than just being a housewife. Back in college, I had dreams of becoming a teacher. I missed learning, being around people, and feeling like I was contributing to something. One evening, while Michael was reading in the living room, I gathered the courage to bring it up. "Michael, can we talk about something?" I asked, sitting next to him. "Of course, what's on your mind?" he replied, putting his book down. "I've been thinking, maybe I could look for a job, or at least some volunteer work. I want to do something more with my time," I said hesitantly. He looked at me, surprised. "But Rachel, you don't need to work. I'm here to take care of everything. Isn't this what you always wanted?" I paused, not wanting to upset him. "I know, and I appreciate that. But I need something of my own, you know? Something that makes me feel fulfilled." Michael sighed, taking my hand. "I just want you to be happy, Rachel. But think about our future, our plans for a family. Don't you think your place is here with me, building that future?" I understood his point, but it didn't sit right with me. Still, I didn't want to argue. "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it," I said, forcing a smile. As days turned into weeks, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I focused on being the best wife I could be, cooking meals, keeping the house tidy, and supporting Michael. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself, the part that yearned for independence and a sense of purpose outside our home. Despite these creeping doubts, our life together seemed good on the surface. We were the ideal couple in everyone's eyes. But as the months rolled by, changes in our home became more noticeable. Michael, once so attentive and present, started coming home late, often missing dinner. At first, he would apologize, citing work pressure and important projects. "Sorry, Rachel, work's a nightmare right now. I hope you understand," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. I tried to be understanding. "It's okay, Michael. Work is important. Just don't overdo it, okay?" But deep down, I felt lonely and neglected. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt empty and quiet. I found myself often sitting by the window, waiting for him to come home. One evening, when Michael came home later than usual, I decided to address the growing distance between us. "Michael, we need to talk," I started as he walked through the door. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes. "What is it now, Rachel?" I hesitated, taken aback by his tone. "It's just, you've been coming home late a lot. I miss spending time with you." He sighed, dropping his keys on the table. "Rachel, I'm working hard for us, for our future. You should be grateful, not complaining." I felt a sting at his words. "I am grateful, but I also miss my husband. Is it wrong to want to spend time together?" Michael's face hardened. "Look, I'm doing my best here. Maybe you should find some hobbies or something to keep you busy." His words hurt, but I swallowed the pain. "Maybe you're right," I murmured, even though it felt wrong. The conversations became less frequent after that. Michael grew more distant, and I felt more isolated. I started questioning everything, our marriage, my role as a wife, and my own happiness. It felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One day, I was cleaning the house and found a receipt for a restaurant in Michael's coat pocket. It was dated for a night he said he'd been working late. My heart sank. Confronting him seemed daunting, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I brought it up. "Michael, I found a receipt in your coat. It was for the night you said you were working late," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "So? I grabbed a bite after work. What's the big deal?" "It's not that. It's just, you never mentioned it. Are you sure there's nothing else I should know?" I asked, hoping for honesty. Michael's response was quick and sharp. "Rachel, you're being paranoid. I'm tired of this constant questioning. Can't a man have some peace in his own home?" I recoiled at his words, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Was I wrong to question him? But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me. Feeling the growing distance in our marriage, I knew I needed something to fill the void. The idea of getting a job or doing something meaningful was still on my mind. It was a scary thought, going against Michael's wishes, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I needed this for myself. One morning, after Michael left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I started looking for job openings. There were a few that caught my eye, but one in particular stood out, a teaching assistant position at a local community center. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hesitated for a moment before applying. My heart was racing. This was it, my first real step towards something of my own. When I hit the submit button, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. A few days later, I got a call. They wanted to interview me. I was over the moon, but also nervous about how Michael would react. I decided to keep it to myself until I knew more. The interview went well, and they offered me the position. I was ecstatic. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. But the thought of telling Michael dampened my excitement. That evening, when Michael came home, I gathered all my courage. "Michael, I have something to tell you," I started, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his expression tired. "What is it now, Rachel?" I got a job, as a teaching assistant. It's just part-time," I said quickly, almost in a whisper. Michael's reaction was not what I expected. He just stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "Do what you want, Rachel. I don't have the energy to argue about this." I was taken aback by his indifference. Part of me had hoped he would see this as a positive step, but it seemed he didn't care. Despite his reaction, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The job was rewarding, and I loved interacting with the children and other staff. It was a breath of fresh air, a break from the loneliness and tension at home. With each day at the community center, I felt more confident and independent. It was a small job, but it meant the world to me. It gave me something to look forward to, something that was just mine. But at home, things with Michael were deteriorating. He was home even less, and when he was, we barely spoke. The once warm and loving man I married was now just a stranger passing by in the hallway. The day of our wedding anniversary was bittersweet. The house buzzed with preparations, yet Michael was nowhere to be seen, supposedly tied up with work. My parents fluttered around, trying to make everything perfect, their efforts casting a shadow over the hollow feeling in my heart. Then, in the midst of the controlled chaos, David arrived, his presence like a burst of fresh air. He strode in, carrying not just his charismatic aura, but also his laptop, brimming with stories from his life on the road. "David, what are you doing here?" My mother's voice was sharp, laced with disapproval. "I couldn't miss Rachel's big day, could I?" David replied, his tone light yet defiant. Ignoring the tension, David turned to me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Got something to show you, sis. You won't believe the parties and the people I've met." We sat down in a quiet corner, and he flipped open his laptop. As he scrolled through photos of crowded stages, vibrant parties, and smiling faces, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. These were glimpses into a world so different from mine. Then, in a casual swipe, everything changed. There he was, Michael. In the midst of a raucous party, with a woman clinging to his arm, laughing, carefree, and so very unlike the man I knew. "Wait, who's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to Michael in the photo. David glanced at the screen, nonchalant. "Oh, him. That's just some guy who's been hanging out with us a lot. Real ladies' man, changes girls like he changes guitar strings. Says he's got a boring and stupid wife at home." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Boring. Stupid. Was that how Michael saw me? Before I could process it all, the front door swung open. Michael walked in. His usual mask of composure shattered the moment he saw David. "David, what the hell are you doing here?" Michael's voice was laced with a panic. David looked up, surprise and realization dawning on his face. "Wait a minute. You're the husband? This is your Mike?" The room fell silent. My parents, unaware of the storm brewing, looked on in confusion. Michael's eyes darted between me and David, the color draining from his face. I held up the laptop, the image of him at the party glaring back at us. "Is this what you do on your late nights at work, Michael? Is this who you really are?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. The room spun around me. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, felt like they were closing in. Betrayal, lies, the facade of our perfect marriage. It all crumbled down in that moment. David stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a silent pillar of support. My parents were still trying to grasp the situation, their expressions shifting from shock to disappointment. The silence in the room was deafening after David's revelation. I stood there, holding the photo, feeling like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. My parents were staring at Michael, waiting for an explanation. Michael's eyes were fixed on the floor. "Michael, is this true?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and regret. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain? How do you explain this?" I said, my voice rising as I waved the photo. "It was just a mistake, Rachel. It meant nothing. I was just confused," Michael stammered. "A mistake? Confused? For how long have you been lying to me?" My voice was shaking with anger and hurt. "Rachel, please, let's talk about this privately," he pleaded, glancing nervously at my parents and David. "No, Michael, I deserve to know the truth. Here and now," I insisted. My mom stepped forward, her face filled with concern. "Rachel, maybe you two should—" "No, Mom, I need answers," I interrupted, my gaze still fixed on Michael. David was quiet, his expression somber. He put a hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. Michael took a deep breath. "It started a few months ago. I was feeling overwhelmed, and she was there. It was a stupid mistake. I love you, Rachel." His words felt like a slap in the face. Love? How could he call this love? "I can't believe this. All those late nights, the times you weren't here." "It was all a lie," I said, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "But you did, Michael. You broke our vows. You broke my trust," I replied, tears streaming down my face. My dad spoke up, his voice stern. "You need to leave, Michael. Now." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my heart. The room was quiet again. My mom came over and hugged me, her embrace warm but unable to comfort the ache in my heart. David stood beside me, his presence a reminder of the family that still stood with me. I felt broken, the illusions of my perfect marriage shattered into a million pieces. But amidst the pain, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of clarity. The truth was out, and now I had to find a way to pick up the pieces and rebuild my life, a life that was mine and mine alone. The days following the revelation were a blur. My parents tried to comfort me, but their words felt distant. David stayed by my side, a silent guardian, his presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I knew what I had to do. The decision was clear, even through the fog of my pain. I needed to end my marriage with Michael. It wasn't just about his betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. Sitting at the kitchen table, David broke the silence. "You okay, sis?" I looked up, my eyes tired. "I will be. I need to start the divorce process. I can't stay in this marriage." David nodded. "I'm here for you, whatever you need." Meetings with lawyers were emotionally draining. I sat across from Michael at our final meeting, his face filled with remorse. "Rachel, I am so sorry. I never wanted things to end this way," he said, his voice low. "I know, but sorry isn't enough, Michael. You broke our trust, and I need to move on," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He nodded, looking defeated. "I just wish I could make things right." "Some things can't be undone," I said, signing the last of the papers. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I was free from the lies, the deceit. But with that freedom came the realization of my new reality. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life. The following weeks were a time of self-reflection. I spent hours talking with David, who shared his own stories of heartbreak and healing. My parents, though still struggling with their own feelings about the divorce, offered their support. One evening, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, Mom spoke up. "Rachel, we're here for you. You're strong, and you'll get through this." Dad nodded in agreement. "You've always been our rock, even when we didn't see it. We're proud of you." Their words, simple and sincere, touched me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I also threw myself into my work at the community center. The children's laughter and innocence were a balm to my wounded heart. I found joy in small moments, a smile from a child, a successful lesson, a thank you from a parent. In the midst of the fallout, I discovered a resilience within me that I didn't know existed. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt overwhelmed by loneliness and doubt. But I kept moving forward, driven by a newfound determination to live a life that was true to myself. Sitting in the small corner cafe, I cradled a warm cup of coffee, my mind drifting back through the whirlwind of recent events. The steam from the coffee blurred with my thoughts, each memory unfolding like a scene from a distant play. I remembered the day in court, the final decree of our divorce. Michael had sat there, a shadow of the man I once knew. He looked pathetic, his eyes void of the confidence he once carried. It was a stark contrast to the man I married, a sight that stirred a mix of pity and relief in me. Then came the tedious, bitter process of dividing our assets. Michael, who once professed undying love, was now coldly squabbling over every cent. It was a tedious and painful process, stripping away any lingering sentiments I had for the marriage we shared. Perhaps the most vivid memory was the last time I saw Michael. He had come to my doorstep, unannounced, his eyes red and swollen. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading for a second chance. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing but contempt. The tears, the pleas, they meant nothing. They were just the last desperate acts of a man who had lost everything through his own doing. Through all these moments, David was my pillar of strength. He was there in the courtroom, offering silent support with his presence. And on that final encounter with Michael, David stood by my side, a protective force against the man who had broken my trust. As I sat in the cafe, the noise of the bustling city around me, I realized how much I had changed. The naive girl who entered that marriage was gone, replaced by a woman who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. I felt a sense of pride in my newfound independence and resilience. My gaze shifted to the busy street outside the cafe window. People were going about their lives, each absorbed in their own stories. I felt a kinship with them, a shared understanding of the struggles and triumphs life brings. I took a sip of my coffee, its warmth spreading through me. I was starting over, but this time on my own terms. There was a future out there waiting for me, filled with possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready to embrace it, with my past as a lesson and my brother's support as my strength.